Fugu, pufferfish. Hey, so today we're talking about one of the scariest foods in the world. And no, I'm not joking. I'm talking about fugu, also known as pufferfish. This is that fish you might have seen in fancy sushi restaurants, usually served in thin, beautiful slices that look almost too perfect to eat. But here's the kicker. If it's not prepared exactly right, it can kill you. Yup, literally. One wrong slice, one tiny mistake, and the toxin inside this fish can stop your heart. Wild, right? So why is fugu even a thing? Well, it comes from Japan, and people there have been eating it for centuries. It's considered a luxury delicacy, kind of like caviar or truffles, but with a terrifying twist. The reason it's so famous isn't just because it's rare or expensive, it's because eating it is a mix of thrill, risk, and, of course, taste. People actually go out of their way to experience the danger. Imagine paying a ton of money to eat something that could literally kill you. But safely prepared, it's supposed to be mild, slightly sweet, and delicate, almost like a cross between scallops and whitefish. The contrast between how it tastes and the fact it could be deadly is exactly what makes it so thrilling. Here's the scary science part. Fugu contains tetrodotoxin, a substance that's about 1,200 times more toxic than cyanide. This toxin is concentrated in certain organs like the liver, ovaries, and sometimes even the skin. If you eat it by mistake, it can paralyze your muscles, including your diaphragm, so you literally stop being able to breathe. And here's the thing. There's no antidote. All doctors can do is keep you alive with support until the toxin leaves your system, if you survive. Sounds insane, right? This is why fugu is banned in many countries, including the US, unless it's prepared by a licensed chef. In Japan, chefs train for years, sometimes over a decade, to get certified to serve it legally. And yes, they have to pass a super intense test, sometimes even having to cut the fish perfectly and identify all the toxic parts. One tiny mistake, and they fail. But why did people even take the risk? Part of it is the adrenaline. Eating fugu is as much about the experience as it is about the flavor. Some say the thrill of knowing it could harm you actually enhances the taste. Others just enjoy the story. I survived fugu because it's not something you do every day. And honestly, the dish itself isn't even scary in looks. When it's served in thin, white slices on a plate, it looks delicate, almost like art. But every bite carries a story of danger, culture, and skill. Now, let's talk numbers, because humans love a good statistic. About 30 to 50 people die each year in Japan from fugu, usually from illegally prepared fish or people trying to cook it themselves at home. That's why most governments say, nope, don't even try it unless it's from a certified chef. And here's a fun fact. Some parts of the fish are considered illegal to serve at all, even for licensed restaurants, like the liver. Yet some daredevils still sneak it in because the extra risk is part of the thrill. Picture this. You're sitting at a small Japanese restaurant, a quiet hum around you, and the chef carefully slices this pearly white fish in front of you. You pick up a piece, maybe dip it in a tiny bit of soy sauce, and pop it into your mouth. It's soft, smooth, slightly sweet, and your brain whispers, remember, this could kill you. The rush of fear mixed with taste, some people describe it as the ultimate combination of danger and delicacy. So next time you hear about fugu, don't just think of it as fish, think of it as a deadly work of culinary art, something that balances life and death on a plate. It's not for everyone, obviously, and that's why most countries don't even allow it. But for those who try it safely in Japan, it's an experience they'll never forget. Honestly, it's a perfect example of how humans are drawn to risk in the name of food. We love the thrill, the story, the bragging rights, and sometimes, just sometimes, the flavor that comes from something so rare and dangerous. So would you try it?
Could you handle a bite of something that could literally kill you if the chef messes up? Most people say no, but some thrill seekers out there are already planning their next trip to Tokyo just to take that risk.
Hákarl, Icelandic fermented shark. All right, brace yourself because the next food on our list is not for the faint of heart. We're talking about hákarl, the infamous Icelandic fermented shark. If you thought sushi was weird, or even pufferfish was extreme, just wait until you hear about this one. Imagine a dish that smells like ammonia, rotting fish, and, well, honestly, death in a jar, but people in Iceland treat it as a traditional delicacy. Yeah, you heard me right. People actually pay good money to eat this. So, let's start with why this exists in the first place. Hákarl comes from Greenland shark, which is extremely toxic when fresh. The meat contains high levels of urea and trimethylamine oxide, chemicals that would make anyone sick if eaten raw. Hundreds of years ago, Icelanders had no refrigeration, and fresh shark was basically inedible poison. But humans being humans, they figured out a way to ferment it safely. They'd bury the shark in gravel or sand for months, let it ferment, then hang it to dry for another few months. After all that time, the meat becomes technically edible, but by now it's smelly, pungent, and borderline horrifying to anyone who isn't Icelandic. Now, let's talk about the experience. Imagine opening a bag or plate of hákarl. The first thing hits you is the smell. It's ammonia-rich, like a mix of urine and rotten fish that makes your nose recoil. People often describe it as the strongest smell in the culinary world, something that will make your eyes water just from standing near it. And then there's the taste. Let's just say it doesn't get easier. It's sharp, fishy, and has this almost chemical bitterness that sticks in your mouth. Some people even say it's like chewing a pair of old socks soaked in fish oil. If you're the kind of person who eats sushi or sashimi and thinks it's a bold flavor, hákarl will probably make you question every life choice that led you to this point. But despite all that, Icelanders love it. Why? Tradition, culture, and survival, mostly. Eating hákarl is a nod to history, to the ingenuity of ancestors who had to make toxic meat edible. It's also often served during Þorrablót, a midwinter festival celebrating old Icelandic traditions. And if you manage to swallow it without vomiting, congratulations! You're now part of a centuries-old Icelandic tradition, and you have a story that will make all your friends recoil in horror. Some locals even say it tastes better after a shot of brennivín, a traditional Icelandic schnapps, which is supposed to wash down the intense ammonia hit. Here's a fun fact. Hákarl is so infamous worldwide that it often makes lists of the world's worst-tasting foods. Some tourists will try it just for the story, take one bite, and immediately regret everything. But hardcore Icelanders, they eat it like it's candy. Some claim that the first taste is awful, the second bite is bearable, and the third bite, you might even start to like it. Whether that's real or just the local exaggeration is up to debate, but it adds to the legend of this gnarly dish. And just to be clear, hákarl is not banned, but it's extremely controversial outside of Iceland, mostly because of the smell and reputation. Shipping it internationally is tricky too because the smell is so strong that some customs inspectors refuse to handle it. So while it's a beloved Icelandic tradition, many people around the world view it as a culinary dare rather than a delicacy.
Picture this for a moment. You're in a tiny Icelandic restaurant, the snow falling outside, the wind howling, and the chef sets a small cube of fermented shark in front of you. You take a deep breath, trying to mentally prepare, and lift it to your mouth. One bite hits, and instantly your face scrunches, your nose flares, and you realize you are officially part of the hot Carl experience. You swallow, maybe with a sip of Brennivine, and you survive. Congratulations! You're now part of a centuries-old Icelandic tradition, and you have a story that will make all your friends recoil in horror. Carl is the perfect example of how humans turn survival into culture. What once was toxic and deadly is now a dish of heritage, pride, and, yes, extreme taste testing. So, if you ever find yourself in Iceland, would you dare to try it? Could you handle the strongest, stinkiest, most challenging flavor on Earth? Most tourists can't, but those who do, they walk away with a story and a smell they'll never forget.
Sannokji, live octopus. All right, brace yourselves, because the next food we're diving into is hands down one of the weirdest and scariest dishes you could ever eat. It's called sannokji, and it comes straight from Korea. Now, if you thought sushi was daring, or pufferfish was extreme, sannokji will make you reevaluate your entire concept of food. Why? Because sannokji is literally live octopus. Yes, you heard that right. Some of its tentacles are still wriggling on the plate when it gets to you. Let's start with the basics. Sannokji is usually made from a small octopus cut into bite-sized pieces right in front of you. Even after being sliced, the tentacles keep squirming thanks to residual nerve activity. That means when you pick up a piece and put it in your mouth, it's still moving. Imagine tiny suction cups wriggling against your tongue in the roof of your mouth. Sounds terrifying? Yeah, it's supposed to be. For locals, though, it's a delicacy and a sign of freshness. There's nothing fresher than something that's still moving. Now, here's the controversial part. People can literally choke on it. Those wriggling tentacles can stick to your throat like super strong suction cups, and if you don't chew carefully, you might find yourself gasping for air. Hospitals in Korea occasionally see cases of people needing emergency help after attempting this dish. That's why sannokji is considered controversial. Even though it's a traditional food, it comes with real life-threatening risks. Eating it is not just about taste. It's about timing, chewing, and sheer nerve. But let's talk about why people actually do it. Because there's more to this than shock value. For one, it's a test of bravery. Eating sannokji is like saying, yeah, I can handle this. In Korea, it's also a social experience. People gather around, have soju, Korean liquor, and challenge each other to see who can manage the wriggliest pieces without panicking. It's part food, part adventure, part show-off. The thrill of the danger actually makes it more enjoyable for some. And then there's the taste and texture. Unlike fugu or hakkarl, which have a subtle or chemical taste, sannokji is actually mild and slightly sweet, with a chewy, crunchy texture. The flavor is subtle. It's really the experience that dominates. That said, chewing is crucial. You have to chew every piece thoroughly to avoid the suction cups sticking anywhere in your throat. People say it's like chewing rubbery seafood that keeps resisting your teeth, which is part of why it's both fascinating and terrifying. Here's a fun fact. Some restaurants will lightly season sannokji with sesame oil and seeds just to make it more palatable and give it a slightly nutty taste.
Others serve it with spicy dipping sauces, because Koreans love flavor-packed foods. But no matter how it's seasoned, the main thrill remains the movement. And yes, some chefs even serve it whole, tentacles still alive and crawling across the plate. Imagine trying to eat that with a fork or chopsticks while it's wriggling on your plate. It's a real-life horror comedy moment. Sanmachi also has a cultural and historical background. Korea has a long tradition of eating live seafood, dating back centuries. It's tied to ideas of freshness and skill in preparation. Unlike raw fish, where freshness is measured by smell or color, live octopus leaves no doubt about how fresh it is. For locals, it's part of heritage and identity, even if outsiders see it as extreme or gross. Now, here's where you, the viewer, come in. Imagine you're sitting in a Korean seafood restaurant. A plate is set in front of you, tiny pieces of octopus wriggling as if they're alive. Oh wait, they literally are. You pick one up with chopsticks. It moves. It's slippery. Your mind screams, maybe I shouldn't, but your curiosity wins. You pop it in your mouth, chew carefully, and success! You survived. You just became part of a centuries-old tradition, experienced a rush of adrenaline, and probably made your friends simultaneously horrified and jealous. Sammakji is a perfect example of how humans embrace adventure in food. We love risk, we love challenge, and sometimes we even find thrill in eating something that fights back. Would you dare try it? Could you handle the wriggling suction cup horror without panicking? Most people can't. But for those who do, it's an unforgettable culinary adventure. So the next time someone tells you about extreme foods, remember sennakji. It's not just raw or unusual, it's alive. It's moving. And it's a full-on interactive dining experience. And let's be honest, nothing else in the world gives you quite that combination of fear, adrenaline, and mild seafood flavor all in one bite.
Kasumarzu, Sardinian maggot cheese. All right, if you thought sanarchi was extreme, brace yourself, because we're about to go even further. This next food is not just unusual, it's downright horrifying to most people. It's called kasumarzu, and it comes from Sardinia, Italy. And yes, it's cheese with live maggots. I know what you're thinking. Why on earth would anyone eat that? Well, stick around because the story behind this stuff is wild. First, let's get the basics out of the way. Kasumarzu is made from sheep's milk cheese, usually a type of pecorino. What makes it special is that after the cheese is made, flies lay eggs in it, and those eggs hatch into larvae. The larvae then digest the cheese, breaking down the fats and making the texture extremely soft, almost liquid in some parts. In other words, the cheese becomes creamy, gooey, and full of wriggling live maggots. Yes, when you cut into it, you'll literally see little white worms moving around. Now here's why it's banned in the EU and considered highly controversial. Live insect larvae are technically illegal in food. Health inspectors say it's a risk for bacteria, infection, or allergic reactions. But locals, they don't care. In Sardinia, kasumarzu is considered the king of cheeses, a delicacy that's eaten during special occasions or shared with guests. The maggots aren't just tolerated, they're a sign of the cheese being at its prime. Supposedly, if the maggots jump when you poke the cheese,
It's fresh and ready to eat. Talk about extreme quality control, right? Let's talk about the eating experience, because this is where it really gets intense. People typically eat it by scooping the soft, maggot-infested cheese onto bread. The flavor is described as sharp, tangy, and strong, much stronger than normal pecorino. And yes, the texture is creamy, almost melting in your mouth, but you're also aware of the tiny squirming things in there. Some people say it's thrilling, like your brain can't quite decide whether to be disgusted or impressed. It's a full-on fear and flavor experience. Here's a fun fact. Some Sardinians even throw the maggots in the air before eating, seeing how high they jump as a sort of taste test. And despite how gross this sounds to outsiders, locals insist that if you can handle the maggots, the flavor is unbeatable. People have been eating kasumarzu for centuries, and it's become deeply embedded in Sardinian culture. It's not just food, it's tradition, pride, and a symbol of bravery. Another wild thing? Some adventurous tourists will try kasumarzu just for the story. Many of them gag, some even spit it out, but those who push through and swallow it often feel a sense of accomplishment, as if they survived a culinary extreme sport. Imagine telling your friends, "Yeah, I ate live maggot cheese in Italy." That's a bragging right few can claim. And honestly, that's part of the appeal. It's not just about flavor. It's about the story and experience. Kasumarzu also teaches an interesting lesson about how different cultures define what's edible. In Sardinia, maggots in cheese are a mark of quality. In most other parts of the world, they'd be disgusting and illegal. It shows how taste, culture, and survival habits shape what people consider a delicacy. And let's be real, this is one of the few foods where the visual factor is as shocking as the taste itself. Seeing tiny worms wriggle on your plate is unforgettable, to say the least. Now imagine yourself in a small Sardinian home. The family brings out a plate of kasumarzu, the maggots wriggling gently in the soft, creamy cheese. They hand you a piece of bread, encourage you to scoop some up and nod encouragingly. Your brain screams, "No way!" But your curiosity wins. You take a bite. The flavor hits your taste buds, strong, salty, rich, and surprisingly pleasant. And your eyes can't help but notice the tiny creatures moving. The combination of disgust, thrill, and taste makes it a moment you'll never forget. Kasumarzu is the perfect example of how humans have turned survival into extreme culinary culture. What was once probably a necessity, making aged cheese safe to eat, has become a prized delicacy, a symbol of courage, and a piece of history. It's banned in much of the EU, yes, but in Sardinia, it continues to thrive, challenging outsiders to confront their ideas of what food should be. So, would you dare to try it? Could you handle live maggots in your cheese for the sake of tradition and taste? Most people can't. But for those who do, it's not just eating. It's participating in a centuries-old cultural ritual. And honestly, that combination of fear, thrill, and flavor is exactly what makes kasumarzu one of the most controversial and unforgettable foods in the world.
Ackee, Jamaican fruit. All right, get ready for another wild one, because we're moving from maggots and cheese to something that looks innocent but is secretly deadly. Say hello to ackee, a fruit from Jamaica that's as notorious for its danger as it is loved for its taste. If you've ever had Jamaican ackee and saltfish, you know it's considered the national dish, a morning staple and absolutely delicious. But here's the catch. If it's unripe or prepared incorrectly, it can kill you. No exaggeration. Deadly. So what is ackee? Well, it's a bright red fruit on the outside that splits open when ripe, revealing soft, creamy yellow flesh and shiny black seeds. The yellow part is the only edible part. The seeds? Don't touch them. And the unripe fruit? Stay far away. That's because ackee contains a toxin called hypoglycine A, which interferes with your body's ability to regulate blood sugar. Eat too much of the unripe fruit, and you could end up with severe vomiting, hypoglycemia, or even death. Historically, this caused a condition in Jamaica called Jamaican vomiting sickness, and it's taken lives for centuries. Pretty intense for a fruit, right? Here's the weird thing. Despite the risk, ackee is deeply loved in Jamaica. People know how to prepare it safely, only picking it when it's fully ripe and letting it naturally open on the tree. Once ripe, the yellow flesh is nutty, buttery, and soft, almost like scrambled eggs or a custard. And when cooked with salted cod, onions, and spices, it's comfort food perfection. Imagine creamy, soft chunks that soak up flavor, with a subtle sweetness and a texture that melts in your mouth. That's ackee. Once prepared right, it's completely safe and absolutely delicious. But let's go back to the danger factor for a second, because that's what makes this fruit so fascinating. Hypoglycine A is nothing to mess with. Just a small bite of unripe flesh can send someone to the hospital, sometimes fatally. It's like Mother Nature playing a prank. The fruit looks harmless and inviting, but it hides a powerful natural toxin inside. In fact, Jamaica has strict rules about selling and preparing ackee, and chefs take it very seriously. If you buy it abroad, many countries restrict its import because of the risk of poisoning. That's how deadly this seemingly simple fruit can be. Now, picture yourself walking through a Jamaican market. Bright red fruits hang from the trees, some split open to reveal yellow flesh. A local vendor warns you to only eat the ripe, naturally opened ones, because the rest are poisonous. You take a bite of a perfectly ripe piece, and it's soft, buttery, with a mild sweetness that's almost addictive. Your taste buds celebrate, your stomach is happy, and for a moment, you forget how close you were to danger. That's the thrill of ackee, a perfect blend of risk, reward, and flavor. Here's a fun fact. Ackee isn't just eaten for taste, it's also a cultural symbol in Jamaica. It represents survival, tradition, and respect for nature. Generations have learned how to handle it safely, turning something deadly into a staple dish that's cherished across the island. And because of that, it's not just food, it's a story on a plate. Every bite connects you to centuries of knowledge and tradition, balancing flavor and caution. And let's be honest, there's something fascinating about a fruit that's deadly if you don't respect it. It's like a tiny culinary thrill ride. You're not just eating, it's a lesson in patience, attention, and cultural awareness. Most fruits you pick up are safe no matter what, but ackee demands your respect. One wrong move and you pay the price, but do it right and you get one of the most iconic, comforting, and flavorful dishes in the world. So here's the question. Would you dare try it? Could you resist the urge to pick the wrong one, or would you leave it to the experts? Most tourists play it safe and stick to restaurants, but those who try it at its best, ripe and carefully prepared, experience a taste like no other. Creamy, buttery soft, and rich, with a subtle sweetness that pairs perfectly with salty fish, spicy peppers, and onions. It's a culinary experience that's worth every bit of caution. Ackee is a perfect example of how food can be both dangerous and delightful, showing us how humans have a long history of figuring out how to turn risk into reward. From deadly fruit to mouth-watering national dish, ackee teaches us a lesson. Respect nature,
follow tradition, and never underestimate seemingly innocent food. So next time you hear about ackee, remember, it's not just a fruit. It's a thrill, a taste, and a tradition all in one bite. Would you dare to taste it? Could you handle the delicious danger hidden in that yellow flush? For those who do, it's an experience they'll never forget.
Beluga caviar. All right, now we're stepping into the world of luxury foods. But not just any luxury food. This one comes with a serious environmental twist. I'm talking about beluga caviar, the infamous black pearls of the culinary world. If you've ever seen a tiny jar in a fancy grocery store or a gourmet restaurant, you know it's ridiculously expensive, sometimes costing more than your rent for a month. But here's the thing. It's not just pricey because it tastes amazing. It's pricey because the fish that produce it, beluga sturgeon, are on the brink of extinction. That's right. The world's most luxurious fish eggs come with a serious ecological price tag. So let's back up a bit. What is beluga caviar? Well, it's the eggs of the beluga sturgeon, a massive freshwater fish that can live for over 100 years and grow to be over 6 meters long. These fish don't just lay eggs like a regular fish. They produce a tiny number of extremely prized eggs after a long maturation period, sometimes up to 20 years before they can even be harvested. That scarcity, combined with the painstaking process of collecting, cleaning, and packaging the eggs, is why a small tin can cost thousands of dollars. It's basically the Rolls-Royce of seafood. But here's where it gets controversial. Beluga sturgeon populations have been decimated by overfishing for their caviar. Fishermen historically caught them from the Caspian Sea, Black Sea, and surrounding rivers, often without any limits. By the 1990s, the population had collapsed, leading to international restrictions and bans on the trade of beluga caviar. Today, the fish are listed as critically endangered, and the caviar is highly restricted under CITES regulations. That means countries have strict rules about exporting, importing, or selling it. So when you see it in a restaurant, you're looking at something that's extremely rare and tightly controlled. Now, let's talk about the eating experience, because that's why people go crazy over it. Beluga caviar has a delicate, buttery, and slightly nutty flavor. The eggs are large, glossy, and burst in your mouth with subtle pop, releasing that creamy taste that makes it unlike any other seafood. Some describe it as silky, briny perfection that melts on the tongue. It's not about strong fishiness. It's about a refined, luxurious, almost ethereal flavor that makes chefs swoon and diners feel like royalty. Pair it with a touch of blini or creme fraiche, and you've got the ultimate indulgence. But remember, the flavor is incredible precisely because it's so rare. The scarcity and prestige add to the allure just as much as the taste. Here's a fun fact. Because beluga sturgeon take decades to mature, farm-raised caviar has become increasingly common. People breed sturgeon in controlled environments to produce eggs without further harming wild populations. It's a way to enjoy this delicacy ethically, but it's still expensive because raising sturgeon takes time, care, and space.
So even sustainable caviar isn't cheap. It's a decades-long labor of love. But let's get real for a second. This is also a lesson about humans and luxury foods. Beluga caviar isn't just about taste. It's a status symbol. It represents wealth, indulgence, and extreme exclusivity. But the downside is that our desire for luxury nearly wiped out the species. That's why it's controversial. Some people argue we should leave it in the wild and enjoy farmed alternatives, while others still covet the rare wild eggs. Every bite of authentic beluga caviar is a reminder that luxury comes with a serious environmental responsibility. Picture this. You're at a high-end restaurant. Someone places a small mother-of-pearl spoon of beluga caviar in front of you. You lift it to your mouth, hear a tiny pop as the eggs burst, and taste that delicate buttery flavor. For a moment, you feel like you're part of a world of opulence. But in the back of your mind, you also remember that these eggs come from a critically endangered fish. That tiny bite holds luxury, flavor, and the weight of human impact on nature all at once. It's not just eating, it's an experience that makes you think. Beluga caviar is a perfect example of how humans value rarity, luxury, and taste, but also how that desire can lead to ecological consequences. It's delicious, it's refined, and it's highly coveted, but it's also a reminder that we need to balance indulgence with responsibility. Today, enjoying it responsibly means choosing farm-raised sources, respecting quotas, and understanding the history behind every tiny glossy egg. So, would you try beluga caviar? Could you handle paying thousands for a few spoonfuls of luxury? And even more, could you savor it while thinking about the fragile species that made it possible? For those who do, it's not just food. It's a story, a thrill, and a taste of history all in one bite.
Raw milk. All right, moving on from luxury caviar, we're taking a turn toward something that might look innocent but is surprisingly controversial. Raw milk. Yeah, just plain milk, but unpasteurized. Sounds simple, right? Milk is milk. What's the big deal? Well, here's the thing. In many countries, raw milk is banned or heavily restricted because of serious bacterial contamination risks. Think E. coli, salmonella, listeria, the stuff that can make you really sick, or worse. And yet, some people swear by it. So, let's start with the basics. Raw milk is milk that hasn't been pasteurized. That means it hasn't been heated to kill harmful bacteria. Pasteurization is a process invented over a century ago to make milk safe for consumption, and it's now standard practice around the world. Without it, milk retains all of its natural enzymes, bacteria, and nutrients, which some people claim are better for digestion or overall health. The debate is intense. Raw milk enthusiasts call it living milk, while health authorities call it a potentially deadly gamble. Here's why it's risky. Milk straight from a cow, goat, or sheep can contain harmful bacteria if the animal was sick, the equipment wasn't sanitized, or it wasn't stored properly. Those bacteria don't just make you mildly ill. They can cause serious foodborne illnesses, particularly in children, the elderly,
or people with weakened immune systems. In the U.S., the CDC reports hundreds of illnesses linked to raw milk every year, and dozens of hospitalizations. Other countries like Canada and many in Europe also restrict or ban its sale. So while it's natural, it's not automatically safe. But why do people still drink it? Well, enthusiasts argue that raw milk is more nutritious than pasteurized milk. They say it contains more vitamins, enzymes, and probiotics, which can aid digestion, boost immunity, and even improve gut health. Some people claim it has a richer, creamier taste, a more complex flavor, and a natural sweetness that pasteurized milk can't replicate. To them, drinking raw milk is a taste of tradition, connecting them to older ways of life before industrial processing. And in small communities or family farms, it's a part of culture, history, and self-sufficiency. Here's an interesting twist. Some people even make their own raw cheese or yogurt from raw milk, claiming it has more flavor depth and character than products made from pasteurized milk. Chefs in certain regions prize raw milk cheeses for their unique taste profiles, which are impossible to replicate with sterilized milk. So while raw milk can be risky, it's also a gateway to artisanal food experiences that celebrate craftsmanship and tradition. But let's be real. There's a reason most countries regulate or ban raw milk. The risk of contamination is real. Imagine taking a sip, thinking you're getting this rich, creamy taste, and suddenly you're facing vomiting, diarrhea, fever, or worse. For some people, the thrill of raw, unprocessed food outweighs the risk, while others see it as a completely unnecessary danger. It's one of those foods that sparks heated debates at kitchen tables and food forums alike. Picture this. You're at a small farm, early morning light filtering through the barn. The farmer hands you a glass of milk straight from the cow, creamy and warm. You lift it to your lips and take a sip. It tastes richer than anything you've ever had in a grocery store. Sweet, fresh, almost buttery. Your senses celebrate, but your brain whispers, "Remember, there could be dangerous bacteria in this. Is it worth it?" That mix of delight, nostalgia, and fear is what raw milk is all about. It's simple, natural, and utterly controversial. Raw milk is a perfect example of how humans balance tradition, taste, and risk. Some people celebrate it as a return to natural foods, valuing flavor and nutrition above all else. Others see it as needlessly dangerous, a product of outdated practices that modern science has improved upon. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Raw milk can be delicious and culturally significant, but it comes with real, undeniable risks. So would you try it? Could you sip something that's natural, fresh, and rich, but potentially hazardous? That's the ultimate question raw milk poses. For those who do, it's a taste of tradition, an embrace of risk, and a reminder that even the simplest foods can carry a story, a thrill, and a lesson about safety and culture.
Foie gras. All right, let's dive into something that is as fancy as it is controversial. Foie gras. If you've ever been to a high-end French restaurant, you've probably seen it on the menu. Those silky, buttery slices of duck or goose liver that look absolutely decadent. People rave about the taste, the texture, the luxurious feel. But behind that indulgent bite lies a huge ethical debate, and it's not something you can ignore if you know what goes into making it. So, what exactly is foie gras? The term literally means fat liver in French, and it's exactly that, the enlarged liver of a duck or goose that has been specially fattened. And here's where it gets controversial. The birds are force-fed through a process called gavage, where a tube is inserted into their throat to deliver huge amounts of food. This makes their livers balloon up to several times their normal size, creating the rich, buttery, delicate taste that chefs and foodies love. Sounds extreme, right? That's because it is. Here's why it's controversial. Animal welfare groups argue that force-feeding is cruel and inhumane, causing stress, discomfort, and even injury to the birds. Some countries have banned foie gras production, and a few have even restricted its sale, calling it unethical. On the other hand, advocates claim it's a traditional French practice that's been around for centuries, and that when done correctly, it doesn't necessarily harm the birds in the long term. Either way, it's a topic that sparks heated debates in kitchens, restaurants, and government halls worldwide. But let's step away from the ethics for a second and talk about why people are willing to pay outrageous prices for this stuff. Taste, texture, experience. Foie gras is silky, rich, and creamy, melting in your mouth in a way that almost defies explanation. Some describe it as buttery, slightly sweet, with a luxurious depth that you just don't get from any other liver or pâté. It's often served with sweet accompaniments like fruit preserves, caramelized onions, or a glass of Sauternes wine, which complement the richness perfectly. Eating it is less about nutrition and more about the experience, a tiny bite of culinary indulgence that feels like a mini celebration on your palate. Here's a fun fact. Foie gras isn't just French. It's been eaten for thousands of years. Ancient Egyptians were reportedly fattening geese to enlarge their livers as far back as 2500 BC. The modern technique we see today in France was perfected centuries later, but the idea of fattened liver as a delicacy has been around a long time. That longevity is part of why the debate is so emotional. It's tied to culture, tradition, and gastronomy at a global scale. Now, imagine this scenario. You're at a fancy French restaurant, the lights dim, the waiter brings a small plate of foie gras in front of you. You take a bite, and it melts on your tongue, buttery, rich, almost decadent. You savor the flavor, the smooth texture, and the craftsmanship that went into preparing it. At the same time, your mind can't help but think about the process, the force feeding, the ethical concerns, the debate that surrounds every bite. That tension between indulgence and conscience is exactly what makes foie gras such a complex culinary experience. Some chefs and producers have started experimenting with ethical alternatives like liver from naturally fattened ducks or innovative techniques that avoid force feeding entirely. These alternatives aim to preserve the luxury, flavor, and texture without causing harm to the birds. But traditional foie gras, especially the kind served in top French restaurants, is still made with the classic method, and that's why it continues to spark controversy. Foie gras is a perfect example of how humans mix luxury, tradition, and ethics in food. It's not just about taste, it's about culture, craftsmanship, and the difficult questions about how far we should go for culinary indulgence. Some people see it as a celebration of heritage and culinary skill. Others see it as a needless cruelty that shouldn't exist in the modern world. And for diners, each bite can be a thought-provoking sensory experience that's both delicious and ethically complicated. So here's the big question for you. Would you try foie gras, knowing exactly what went into it? Could you savor that silky, buttery indulgence while wrestling with the ethical debate behind it? Most people are split. Some will never touch it. Others will consider it a once-in-a-lifetime culinary thrill. Either way, foie gras is a food that forces you to think, taste, and reflect all at once. It's rich, controversial, and unforgettable. Truly a dish that combines luxury,
tradition, and debate on one plate.
Kinder Surprise chocolate. All right, let's switch gears a bit and talk about something that might feel totally innocent, but actually caused a lot of controversy, especially in the United States. I'm talking about Kinder Surprise chocolate, those iconic, colorful chocolate eggs that hide a small toy inside. If you've ever seen one, you know the appeal. A sweet chocolate shell with a fun little toy surprise waiting inside. Sounds harmless, right? But here's the kicker. These chocolates are actually banned in the USA. And it's not about taste, it's not about flavor, it's all about safety. So what makes Kinder Surprise so special? First off, it's basically a milk chocolate egg with a thin chocolate shell. Inside is a tiny plastic capsule, and inside that capsule is usually a small toy. Sometimes something that needs to be assembled, sometimes a tiny figurine, and sometimes just a quirky little gadget. Kids love them because it's like a 2-for-1 treat. You get chocolate and a surprise toy. But that surprise is also what makes it controversial in some countries. Here's why it's banned in the US. The Consumer Product Safety Commission has strict rules about embedding non-food items inside food. Basically, if a child accidentally swallows a small piece, it can choke or cause internal harm. And the tiny toys inside Kinder eggs are the perfect size to get stuck in a child's throat. In fact, there have been cases where children choked on small parts, which led the US to classify the eggs as hazardous. So while Europe sees them as fun and safe, the US errs on the side of caution. Now, before you think this is just a boring legal thing, let's talk about why Kinder Surprise became such a global phenomenon. These eggs are all about anticipation and delight. Kids love peeling back the chocolate, cracking open the capsule, and seeing what's inside. Some toys are collectible, others are simple and silly, but every single one gives a tiny thrill of surprise. There's something magical about not knowing what you're going to get, and that magic is exactly what made these eggs so beloved around the world. Here's a fun fact. The original idea for Kinder Surprise came from Italy in the 1960s, during a time when chocolate manufacturers wanted to combine snacking with play. The concept was genius. Chocolate already makes kids happy, and adding a small toy made it twice as exciting. Over time, the eggs became a staple in Europe and many other countries, with themed collections tied to movies, cartoons, or popular franchises. Each season, kids and collectors eagerly waited for the next limited edition toys. But even without the ban in the US, the eggs still teach us something interesting about human psychology and joy in small surprises. That little moment of cracking the chocolate, opening the capsule, and seeing a tiny toy inside triggers dopamine in the brain, the same pleasure response that makes surprises, games, and gifts so enjoyable. It's clever marketing, yes, but it also shows why people of all ages, not just kids, find the concept irresistible. Imagine this. You're a kid, or maybe just a kid at heart, sitting at the breakfast table. You grab a brightly colored egg, admire it for a moment, and then snap it open. Chocolate melts in your mouth,
and your eyes immediately dart to the tiny capsule inside. You twist it open and reveal a tiny plastic car. Maybe it's nothing special. Maybe it's the rare collectible from the series. But that moment of discovery is pure joy. It's a simple pleasure that's perfectly packaged in a small chocolate shell. Even with the ban in the US, kids and adults find ways to get their hands on Kinder Surprise by ordering online or buying from traveling friends. And the excitement is just as real. It's a reminder that even something as simple as a chocolate egg can spark anticipation, wonder, and delight as long as you handle it safely. So here's the question for you. Would you try a Kinder Surprise if you could? Could you resist the charm of chocolate and the thrill of a tiny mystery toy? Most people find it impossible because that combination of taste, surprise, and play is too powerful to ignore. And even though it's banned in the US, the story of Kinder Surprise shows us how creativity, joy, and a little bit of risk can combine to create something magical for kids and adults alike.
Horse meat. All right, now we're diving into something that really pushes cultural boundaries. Horse meat. Yep, meat from horses, the same animals many people think of as companions, racing champions, or majestic creatures in movies. But here's the kicker. In some parts of the world, horse meat is considered a delicacy, while in others, it's banned or heavily taboo. The controversy isn't about taste or nutrition. It's all about ethics, culture, and emotional connections. So let's start with the basics. Horse meat is lean, rich in protein, and lower in fat than beef or pork, making it nutritious and flavorful. It has a slightly sweet taste, often described as tender and gamey, depending on how it's prepared. In countries like France, Belgium, Italy, and Japan, it's been eaten for centuries, sometimes as steaks, sausages, or cured meats. In these places, horse meat is perfectly normal, sold in butcher shops, and even featured in traditional recipes. But in countries like the United States, the United Kingdom, and parts of Australia, eating horse meat is seen as ethically unacceptable. Horses aren't just livestock. They're companions, sports animals, and cultural icons. The idea of eating an animal many people view as a friend or a member of the family is deeply unsettling to many, which is why horse meat is banned or heavily regulated in those regions. This makes it one of the most culturally controversial foods in the world. Here's an interesting twist. During times of famine or food scarcity, horse meat has historically been a crucial source of protein. In wars or economic hardships, people turn to horses for survival. So the food taboo isn't about taste. It's about societal norms and emotional attachment. In many cultures, the rejection of horse meat is tied more to symbolism than to health or flavor. Meanwhile, in cultures that have consumed it for centuries, it's respected as a traditional, nutritious choice. Now, let's talk about taste and experience, because it's not just about culture. Horse meat is lean and slightly sweet, which makes it ideal for slow cooking, stews, or cured preparations like saucisson in France or wasashi, raw horse meat in Japan. The texture can range from tender to firm depending on the cut, but chefs who specialize in it praise its rich flavor and versatility. For people who grew up eating it, horse meat is comforting, familiar, and part of culinary identity, just like beef in other countries. Here's a fun fact. In Japan, there's a dish called basashi, which is essentially thinly sliced raw horse meat, often served with soy sauce, ginger, and garlic. People describe it as delicate, slightly sweet, and melt-in-your-mouth tender, similar to high-quality beef sashimi. In France, horse steaks is served with sauces or in stews, and in Italy, cured horse meat like pastasada is a regional specialty. In all these cases, eating horse meat is completely normal, legal, and culturally ingrained. Now, imagine the reaction if you served horse meat in a place where it's taboo. People might gasp, refuse to eat, or even be offended,
And that's because our connection to certain animals goes beyond food. Horses symbolize freedom, beauty, and companionship. Eating them feels personally and emotionally challenging, even if the meat is delicious and nutritious. This is why horse meat isn't just a culinary choice, it's a cultural litmus test about how societies define what is acceptable to eat. Horse meat is a perfect example of how food is not just about taste, but about culture, values, and identity. It shows us how what's considered normal in one place can be shocking, taboo, or even banned in another. It also highlights how emotional connections with animals influence our food choices. Some people can't imagine eating horse meat under any circumstances, while others grow up enjoying it as a regular, wholesome part of their diet. So here's a thought-provoking question for you. Would you eat horse meat if it was considered a delicacy in your culture? Could you separate your emotional attachment to horses from the culinary experience? Most people struggle with this, which is exactly why horse meat continues to spark heated debates, legal restrictions, and passionate opinions around the world. Horse meat is more than just food. It's a window into cultural diversity, ethics, and the psychology of eating. From tender steaks to raw delicacies, it challenges our ideas of what's edible, what's acceptable, and how deeply food connects to our values and traditions. It's a perfect example of a controversial food that forces you to think before you take a bite, and maybe even question why you eat the things that you do.
Shark fin soup. All right, now we're diving into a dish that's luxurious, controversial, and has a serious environmental and ethical story behind it. You might have seen it in fancy Chinese restaurants, often served at weddings or special celebrations. It's considered a symbol of wealth, status, and honor. But behind that elegant bowl of broth is a practice that's sparked global outrage. So what is shark fin soup? At first glance, it's just a clear, flavorful soup with thin strips of shark fin floating inside. The fins themselves are mostly textural, not particularly flavorful. They provide that slightly chewy, gelatinous bite that chefs and diners prize. The taste comes mainly from the broth, usually made with chicken, ham, or seafood, simmered for hours to create a rich, savory flavor. The shark fin is more about the experience and prestige than the taste itself. Here's why it's controversial. Sharks are being targeted specifically for their fins, often through a practice called finning, where fishermen cut off the fins and throw the rest of the shark back into the ocean, usually while it's still alive. Without their fins, sharks can't swim, can't hunt, and ultimately die a slow and agonizing death. It's brutal, wasteful, and has led to dramatic declines in shark populations worldwide. Because of this, many countries and regions have banned shark finning or the sale of shark fins in places like the US, EU countries, and parts of Asia. But why do people eat it at all? Tradition, prestige, and symbolism. Shark fin soup has been served in Chinese culture for centuries, often at weddings, banquets, or during Lunar New Year celebrations. Eating it signals wealth, generosity, and honor to guests because shark fins are expensive and historically rare. It's less about culinary delight and more about social status and cultural ritual. Imagine hosting a wedding or banquet without it in some circles. It's like missing the crown jewel of the feast. Here's a striking fact. 1 pound of shark fins can cost hundreds of dollars, depending on the species and quality. The rarity and cost are what made it a symbol of wealth and prestige. In fact, in some areas, demand for shark fins has driven overfishing to catastrophic levels, pushing certain shark species to the brink of extinction. Conservationists warn that removing top predators like sharks from oceans disrupts ecosystems, affecting everything from fish populations to coral reef health. It's a ripple effect that goes far beyond a single soup bowl. Now, let's talk about the dining experience, because people still defend it as a delicacy. When prepared properly, shark fin soup has a luxurious, silky texture, almost like very fine gelatin, with subtle, slightly oceanic notes from the broth. It's not a strong fish flavor. It's mild,
almost neutral, allowing the broth to shine. People often describe it as an elegant, refined dish, a sign of sophistication. But here's the twist. The fin itself doesn't taste like much. It's prized for texture, tradition, and the social prestige it conveys, rather than pure flavor. Because of the controversy, some chefs and restaurants have started using alternatives like vegan shark fins made from gelatinous plant-based ingredients. These replicate the chewy texture without harming any sharks, letting diners experience the traditional feel of the dish while avoiding ethical and environmental issues. It's a clever compromise, preserving the tradition while protecting the oceans. Now, imagine this scenario. You're at a wedding banquet in Hong Kong. The waitstaff brings out a steaming bowl of shark fin soup. The aroma of rich broth hits your nose, and you take a sip. The texture of the fin is smooth, slightly chewy, delicate. You savor the flavor, but in the back of your mind, you know the story, the millions of sharks taken for this dish, the environmental impact, the cruel finning practices. That combination of taste, tradition, and ethical tension is exactly what makes shark fin soup one of the most controversial foods in the world. Shark fin soup is a perfect example of how food can symbolize status, tradition, and luxury, yet also highlight ethical and ecological dilemmas. It shows us that what we eat is never just about flavor. It's culture, economy, and responsibility all in one bowl. Some people continue to eat it as part of tradition, some choose alternatives, and some advocate for total bans to protect the species. It's a dish that forces diners to think, taste, and reflect all at once. So here's the question for you. Would you try shark fin soup if it were legal and available? Could you enjoy the luxurious experience while being aware of the massive ethical and environmental consequences behind it? For those who do, it's more than a meal. It's a conversation about tradition, sustainability, and what it means to indulge responsibly.
Mountain chicken. All right, now let's hop, pun intended, into a dish that sounds a little wild, but has a real history and conservation story behind it. Mountain chicken. Despite the name, this isn't some exotic poultry, it's actually the legs of a giant frog. Yes, you heard that right. The Caribbean used to enjoy this delicacy, and the name mountain chicken comes from the fact that the frog's legs taste surprisingly like chicken. Crazy, right? But there's a lot more to this dish than just taste. It's a story of tradition, overconsumption, and environmental consequences. So, what exactly is mountain chicken? It comes from the giant frog species Leptodactylus phallax, native to the islands of Dominica and Montserrat. These frogs are huge. Some can grow up to 21 centimeters long, making them the largest frog species in the Caribbean. Locals traditionally hunted them for food and cultural dishes, often frying the legs or cooking them in stews. To people in the Caribbean, mountain chicken was delicious, protein-rich, and part of the culinary heritage. The flavor, light, tender, and very much like chicken, which explains the quirky name. Here's where things get controversial. Over time, these frogs were heavily overharvested. People loved eating them, and commercial hunting increased pressure on their populations. On top of that, in the 1990s and 2000s, a deadly fungal disease called chytridiomycosis swept through the Caribbean, decimating frog populations. The result? Mountain chickens are now critically endangered, and hunting them is heavily restricted or banned in many areas. This isn't just a food story, it's a lesson about human impact on fragile ecosystems. Despite being rare now, mountain chicken remains iconic in the Caribbean culture. People remember it as a traditional delicacy, often served during festivals, holidays, or special occasions.
It's one of those foods that connects people to their heritage, history, and local environment. But today, conservationists have to step in. Protecting mountain chicken means leaving the frogs in the wild, creating breeding programs, and educating locals and tourists alike about why overharvesting and habitat loss can wipe out a species. Now, let's talk about the experience. When cooked properly, mountain chicken is delicate, lean, and flavorful. The legs are tender, the taste reminiscent of light chicken, and the texture's firm but juicy. Chefs might fry it, grill it, or incorporate it into stews with local spices and herbs. For people who grew up eating it, it's comfort food, tied to family, celebrations, and island identity. Eating it isn't just about flavor, it's about tradition and community. Here's a fun fact. Despite its endangered status, some adventurous tourists still seek out mountain chicken when visiting Dominica or Montserrat. They want the authentic cultural experience, but conservationists now strongly discourage this, emphasizing sustainable alternatives. Some chefs have turned to frogs from non-endangered species or other meats to recreate the flavors of mountain chicken dishes without harming the population. This is a clever way to honor tradition while protecting biodiversity. Imagine this. You're in a small Caribbean village, sitting down for a festive meal. The table is full of local dishes, and in the center is a plate of fried mountain chicken legs. You pick one up, take a bite, and are surprised by how much it tastes like tender chicken. But at the same time, you learn that the very species you're eating is critically endangered in the wild. That mix of culinary delight and environmental awareness is exactly what makes mountain chicken a unique and controversial food story. Mountain chicken is a perfect example of how culture, taste, and conservation collide. It shows that foods we love can have unintended consequences if we don't consider their ecological impact. It also highlights the importance of protecting species while still celebrating traditional dishes through responsible alternatives. The story of mountain chicken isn't just about food, it's about how humans interact with nature, how tradition evolves, and how culinary heritage can survive without endangering the planet. So here's a question for you. Would you try mountain chicken if you had the chance? Could you enjoy the taste while being aware of its endangered status and the history of overharvesting? It's a dish that makes you think while you eat, a reminder that every bite can have a story, a lesson, and an impact. For those who have tasted it, mountain chicken isn't just food, it's history, culture, and a conversation with nature on a plate.
Horehound candy. All right. Now let's talk about something that seems harmless, that even old-fashioned. Horehound candy. You know those little brownish, hard candies with a strong, slightly bitter flavor? If you've ever had one, you might have thought, this tastes kind of like herbal medicine. And you'd be right. Horehound candy isn't just candy, it's an herbal remedy with a very long history, but also one that comes with some unexpected controversies. So what is horehound? Horehound is a plant, Marubium vulgare, that grows wild in parts of Europe, Asia, and North America. People have been using it for centuries as a medicinal herb, mostly to treat coughs, colds, and digestive problems. The leaves are bitter and aromatic, and when boiled with sugar or honey, they create the candy that many of us know today. Horehound candy has that distinctive, earthy, slightly bitter flavor that sets it apart from your typical sweets. It's not for everyone, but if you like herbal flavors, it's kind of a classic treat. Here's why it's controversial. Horehound contains bioactive compounds that in small doses are considered safe and may even help with respiratory issues. But in excessive amounts, it can be toxic. Symptoms of overconsumption can include nausea, vomiting, dizziness, or even more serious effects in extreme cases. Because of this, some countries and regions have placed restrictions on the sale or use of horehound in medicinal products or candies. It's one of those foods that sounds harmless but can actually be risky if overdone. Now let's step back and look at why people still enjoy it. Horehound candy isn't just a medicinal treat, it's a nostalgic piece of history. Think back to old-fashioned candy shops, glass jars filled with earthy, brown candies, and the scent of herbs and sugar in the air. That's where horehound shines. For many, it's a reminder of childhood, grandma's remedies, or simple times when candy had a purpose beyond just sweetness. You eat it, and you're tasting centuries of tradition in a tiny, bittersweet bite. Here's a fun twist. Horehound was also popular among early American settlers. They used it to make tea, syrups, and lozenges, believing it could help with coughs, colds, and digestive problems. The candy we have today is essentially a sweetened, hardened version of these herbal remedies. Unlike modern candy, which is mostly sugar, horehound carries real herbal properties, giving it a unique flavor and function. People sometimes even brew horehound tea for its soothing effects, especially during cold season. Now imagine this. You pick up a piece of horehound candy, you pop it in your mouth, and first comes the bitter herbal punch, followed by a lingering earthy sweetness. It's not like charquid or caramel. It's different, unexpected, and a little medicinal. You start thinking about why people made this candy in the first place, not just to satisfy a sweet tooth, but to deliver tiny doses of a healing herb in a convenient and portable form. And then remember, too much of it isn't safe. That's the balance. Heritage, taste, and caution, all in one candy. Horehound candy is a perfect example of how food and medicine overlap. It shows that not all sweets are just sugar, and some carry real bioactive compounds that can be helpful or harmful depending on the dose. It also highlights how tradition can carry both charm and risk. People love it for the flavor, the nostalgia, and the herbal benefits, but the warnings remind us that even small candies can have potent effects. Here's another interesting fact. Some modern candy makers are experimenting with horehound blends, mixing it with other herbs or flavors to soften the bitterness while keeping the traditional properties. It's a way to honor the heritage while making it more appealing to contemporary tastes. And it's a reminder that culinary history isn't static. It evolves while keeping its roots in tradition. So here's the big question. Would you try horehound candy if you'd never had it before? Could you enjoy that bitter, herbal, old-fashioned flavor, knowing that it has real medicinal properties but can be toxic in excess? It's a candy that makes you think, taste, and reflect all at once. It's a little piece of history you can pop in your mouth, but it also reminds you that heritage foods often come with stories, risks, and lessons about balance. Horehound candy isn't just a sweet treat. It's a lesson in history, herbal medicine, and moderation. Every bite carries centuries of tradition, cultural nostalgia, and a gentle reminder that even the simplest foods can have surprising effects. So next time you see that earthy brown candy, remember, it's more than sugar. It's a little bitter bite of heritage, flavor, and caution, all rolled into
strychnine root extract. All right, now we're diving into something that sounds straight out of a horror story, but was actually part of everyday life at one point. Strychnine root extract. Yep, the same stuff you might know from detective novels or crime shows, the poison. But here's the crazy part. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, people actually used it in tonic drinks, patent medicines, and even as a stimulant. It sounds insane today, but back then, strychnine was considered a miracle ingredient, just a tiny amount, and people thought it could boost energy, improve digestion, and even treat a host of ailments. So let's start with the basics.
Strychnine is a chemical extracted from the seeds of the Strychnos nux vomica tree, native to India and Southeast Asia. It's extremely potent in larger doses, causing muscle convulsions, seizures, and death. That's why it's widely known as a poison. But in minuscule amounts, early chemists and doctors thought it could stimulate the nervous system, increase alertness, and act as a tonic for fatigue. People literally drank beverages laced with poison, thinking it was medicine. Here's where it gets controversial. Imagine sipping a tonic, feeling a bit more awake or energized, and knowing it contains a substance that could kill you if the dose is wrong. That's exactly what people did in the 1800s and early 1900s. Strychnine extract was added to bitters, elixirs, and medicinal beverages marketed as cure-alls for everything from digestive issues to low energy. There were no strict regulations on doses, labeling, or safety, so the risk was very real. Accidental overdoses weren't uncommon, and the line between miracle cure and deadly poison was extremely thin. Here's a fun historical fact. Strychnine was sometimes called a brain stimulant in advertisements, and people actually consumed it in small doses, thinking it would improve their mood, alertness, or even memory. Some tonic bottles proudly claimed that the drink contained strychnine for health and vigor. Can you imagine that today? A drink sold as a health tonic that's literally a poison? Wild, right? Now let's talk about why it was eventually banned. By the early 20th century, as science and medicine advanced, people realized just how dangerous strychnine could be, even in small amounts. Regulatory bodies like the U.S. Food and Drug Administration stepped in to restrict or ban the use of strychnine in food and beverages. Today, it's strictly prohibited in consumable products, and for good reason. It's too risky and toxic to be safe for human consumption. That's why seeing strychnine in modern drinks would be a huge red flag. Even though it's banned now, strychnine tonic drinks teach us something fascinating about human history, medicine, and risk perception. Back then, people were willing to take risks that seem absurd today, trusting that a tiny dose of poison could actually make them healthier or more energetic. It's a reminder that human innovation sometimes outpaces safety knowledge, and that medicinal ingredients weren't always what they seemed. Now, imagine this scenario. You're in the 1890s, walking into a pharmacy or apothecary. The shelves are lined with bottles of bitters, tonics, and elixirs. One catches your eye. It promises vigor, energy, and improved digestion, and yes, it contains strychnine. You think a little poison might just make me feel alive. You sip the drink carefully, feeling alert for a moment, but the line between benefit and danger is extremely thin. That's exactly why strychnine has such a fascinating, almost cinematic history. Strychnine root extract is a perfect example of how food, medicine, and risk intersect. It shows that something considered dangerous today was once seen as a miracle ingredient, highlighting how much our understanding of safety and science has evolved. It also sparks curiosity about how human culture interacts with nature, using plants and compounds in ways that sometimes teeter on the edge of danger. So here's the question for you. Would you have tried a strychnine tonic back in the day, trusting the pharmacist's claims? Could you have resisted the allure of a miracle stimulant, knowing it was also a deadly poison? It's a story that makes us reflect on how far we've come in medicine, regulation, and awareness of risk, and also marvel at the bold, sometimes reckless curiosity of our ancestors. Strychnine root extract isn't just a historical oddity, it's a lesson in human ingenuity, risk-taking, and the evolution of medicine. Every tiny drop in those old tonics carried potential benefit and real danger, reminding us that even the most ordinary-looking drinks can hide extraordinary and sometimes deadly stories.
Today, we sip coffee or tea for alertness, but back then, people sipped strychnine, walking a fine line between energy and peril.
Unpasteurized cheese. All right, let's talk about something that's creamy, flavorful, and a little bit rebellious. Unpasteurized cheese, also called raw milk cheese. This isn't just any cheese. It's cheese made from milk that hasn't been heat treated to kill bacteria. Now, if you're thinking, wait, isn't that dangerous? You're right. That's exactly why it's controversial in the United States and several other countries. But at the same time, it's incredibly prized by cheese lovers for its taste and tradition. So let's start with the basics. Pasteurization is the process of heating milk to kill harmful bacteria, like E. coli, Salmonella, or Listeria. It's a safety step that became widespread in the early 20th century, helping prevent foodborne illnesses. But unpasteurized cheese skips this step, meaning it still contains natural bacteria from the milk. Some of these bacteria are beneficial and help develop complex flavors, but some can be harmful if the cheese isn't made or stored properly. That's the balance. It's tradition and taste versus safety risk. Unpasteurized cheese has been made for centuries in Europe. Think about French, Italian, or Swiss artisan cheeses. They often rely on raw milk to achieve depth of flavor and texture. Brie, Camembert, Comté, and certain aged cheddars are classic examples. Cheese aficionados argue that pasteurization flattens flavor, stripping away subtle nuances and character that raw milk provides. So while pasteurized cheeses might be safer, they don't always capture the full essence of traditional cheesemaking. Here's why it's controversial in the U.S. For decades, regulations have restricted the sale of raw milk cheese, especially soft cheeses, unless they've been aged for at least 60 days. The concern? Pathogenic bacteria. Soft, moist cheeses made from raw milk provide a perfect environment for harmful bacteria to grow if not handled properly. People who consume unpasteurized cheese are at a higher risk of foodborne illness, especially pregnant women, children, the elderly, and immunocompromised individuals. That's why some states have strict bans or labeling requirements, and why unpasteurized cheese sometimes carries a reputation for being risky. But here's the fascinating part. Many chefs and cheese lovers insist that raw milk cheese offers something pasteurized cheese can't. The flavors are richer, more complex, and more terroir-driven. Terroir basically means that the cheese reflects the environment, soil, and feed of the animals that produce the milk. So when you bite into a well-crafted raw milk cheese, you're actually tasting a sense of place, the farm, the pasture, even the season. Pasteurized cheese is more standardized, but raw milk cheese carries history, artistry, and character in every bite. Now, let's talk about experience. Imagine opening a wedge of raw milk brie. The rind is delicate, slightly earthy. You cut a slice and see the creamy interior, soft and almost buttery. As you taste it, you notice subtle notes, hints of grass, nuts, maybe a touch of tangy funk. That complexity is hard to achieve with pasteurized milk. It's a sensory journey, connecting you to centuries of tradition and the natural microbiome of the milk. But, of course, you have to trust the cheesemaker. Hygiene, proper aging, and storage are critical. Here's a fun fact. Unpasteurized cheese isn't just about flavor, it's also about nutrition. Raw milk contains enzymes and probiotics that aid digestion and may support gut health. Some people argue that pasteurization destroys these beneficial components. However, the risks still exist, which is why education and careful production are key. It's all about respecting tradition while managing safety. Now imagine this scenario. You're at a farmer's market and spot a small, handcrafted raw milk cheese. You smell it, earthy, rich, slightly tangy. You taste it and it's a flavor bomb, unlike anything you've had before. At the same time, you know there's a tiny risk of bacterial infection if it's not handled properly. That mix of excitement, trust, and caution is exactly what makes unpasteurized cheese both loved and controversial. Unpasteurized cheese is a perfect example of how tradition, flavor, and safety intersect. It reminds us that food isn't just about calories or convenience. It's about culture, craftsmanship, and connection to the land. But it also teaches a valuable lesson. Even foods that seem wholesome and artisanal can carry hidden risks if not treated with care. Cheese lovers embrace that risk for the reward, the incredible, unmatched taste that raw milk delivers. So here's the question for you. Would you try unpasteurized cheese if given the choice? Could you savor that unique flavor and heritage while being mindful of the potential risks? It's a food that challenges your palate and your caution, offering a bite of history, artistry, and daring all at once. Every wedge tells a story, and every taste is a connection to centuries of cheese-making tradition. Unpasteurized cheese isn't just a food. It's a conversation between taste, tradition, and risk, reminding us that the most fascinating flavors often come with a little intrigue and a lot of history.
Foxtail millet sprouts. All right, now let's chat about something that sounds super healthy and innocent. Foxtail millet sprouts. You might be picturing tiny green sprouts full of nutrients ready to toss in your salad or smoothie. And yes, they're nutritionally awesome, packed with protein, fiber, vitamins, and minerals. But here's the twist. Despite being a health food superstar, some countries have banned them at times because of contamination risks. Yep, even the healthiest-looking foods can hide a potential danger if not handled properly. So, first off, what are foxtail millet sprouts? Foxtail millet itself is an ancient grain widely grown in Asia and parts of Africa. It's naturally gluten-free, rich in magnesium, iron, and antioxidants, and has a low glycemic index, making it a favorite for people looking for nutritious alternatives to rice or wheat. When sprouted, the grain transforms. The nutrients become more bioavailable, meaning your body can absorb them more easily. Sprouting also enhances protein content and adds enzymes that aid digestion. So, in theory, foxtail millet sprouts are a superfood on steroids. Now, here's why it gets controversial. Sprouts in general are fertile ground for bacteria because they're grown in warm, moist environments. This is perfect for beneficial growth, but it's also perfect for harmful bacteria like E. coli, Salmonella, or Listeria. Foxtail millet sprouts, like other sprouts, carry this risk, and there have been rare cases of foodborne outbreaks linked to contaminated sprouts. In response, some countries have temporarily banned or heavily regulated their sale, particularly in raw form, to protect public health. Despite the risk, sprouts remain hugely popular among health enthusiasts. They're crunchy, slightly nutty, and super versatile. You can toss them in salads, stir-fries, smoothies, or even eat them as a snack.
People love them because they pack a lot of nutrition in a tiny, fresh package. Plus, sprouting grains at home is easy, cheap, and satisfying. Watching a tiny seed transform into a green, living sprout feels almost magical. Here's a fun fact. The contamination risk isn't about foxtail millet specifically. It's a general risk with sprouts. Warm, humid conditions needed for sprouting create an environment where bacteria can multiply quickly if seeds aren't properly cleaned or handled. That's why food safety authorities sometimes issue warnings, particularly for pregnant women, children, the elderly, and immunocompromised people. It's not a reason to panic, but it is a reason to be careful and smart about sourcing and preparing sprouts. Let's talk taste and experience. Foxtail millet sprouts have a mild, nutty flavor with a slight crunch and earthy aroma. They're not overwhelming, which makes them easy to incorporate into many dishes. When you bite into them, you get a fresh, crisp texture that contrasts nicely with soft vegetables, grains, or cooked meals. The experience is both satisfying and nutritionally rewarding, giving you that "I'm eating healthy and feeling great" vibe. Imagine this scenario. You're at a trendy cafe, and they offer a salad with foxtail millet sprouts sprinkled on top. You pick up a fork, enjoy that subtle crunch and nutty flavor, and feel good about the nutrient boost you're getting. But in the back of your mind, you remember the contamination warnings you've read online. That mix of delicious nutrition and cautious awareness is exactly what makes sprouts both fascinating and slightly edgy in the food world. Here's another cool aspect. Foxtail millet sprouts are easy to grow at home, and home growers can control cleanliness and water quality, reducing risk significantly. By rinsing seeds thoroughly, using clean containers, and changing water regularly, you can enjoy sprouts safely. Many health-conscious people have turned sprouting into a daily ritual, appreciating the visual transformation and the sense of connection to natural food processes. It's like a tiny gardening project in your kitchen that also boosts your health. Foxtail millet sprouts are a perfect example of how healthy foods can carry hidden risks if not handled properly. They remind us that nutritional benefits don't come without responsibility. Eating them is rewarding, but it also teaches a subtle lesson about food safety, preparation, and awareness. It's a small but powerful reminder that even seemingly innocent foods can be both beneficial and potentially dangerous if we're not careful. So here's the question for you. Would you eat foxtail millet sprouts knowing the contamination risk, or would you stick to cooked or regulated versions? Could you enjoy their crunchy, nutty goodness while practicing proper hygiene and safety? Sprouts like these make eating fun, engaging, and thoughtful. They're tiny green lessons in nutrition, biology, and responsibility all at once. Foxtail millet sprouts aren't just food. They're a living connection to ancient grains, modern nutrition, and the delicate balance between risk and reward. Every bite is fresh, crunchy, and packed with history, flavor, and nutrients. But it also comes with a gentle reminder that even superfoods need respect and care.
Red dye number 2 in foods. All right, let's talk about something that looks bright, cheerful, and totally harmless, but actually has a surprisingly dark history in food. Red dye number 2.
Yep, the bright red color in candies, cereals, and snacks that made food look fun and appetizing. It turns out that not all red dyes are created equal. Red dye number 2 might sound like a boring chemical name, but it's a story that combines science, fear, and regulation in a way that still affects how we see food today. So what exactly is red dye number 2? Officially, it's called amaranth, and it's a synthetic dye that was widely used in the 1950s and 1960s. Manufacturers loved it because it made food vividly red, which grabs your attention and makes you want to eat it. Imagine the bright red gelatin desserts, candies, or cereals of the mid-20th century. It's almost impossible not to notice that striking color. But here's where it gets controversial. Studies eventually linked red dye number 2 to cancer in lab animals, which triggered a huge public scare and regulatory action. Here's some historical context. Back in the 1950s, the food industry wasn't as tightly regulated as it is now. Synthetic dyes were a big trend. They were cheaper than natural dyes and made food look more appealing to kids and consumers. Red dye number 2 became especially popular in things like cherry-flavored candies, cereals, and beverages. But researchers started noticing troubling results. When lab rats were fed red dye number 2, some developed tumors, particularly in the adrenal glands. This raised alarms about the potential risks for humans. In response, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, or FDA, acted decisively. By 1976, red dye number 2 was banned from use in foods and cosmetics in the United States. It was one of the first times that a food additive was prohibited due to cancer concerns, setting a precedent for how we handle synthetic ingredients in modern food. Imagine eating your favorite bright red candy as a kid, not knowing that the chemical making it so vibrant could actually be dangerous. It's a mix of nostalgia and horror that really sticks with people. Now, here's an interesting twist. Not everyone agrees on how dangerous red dye number 2 actually was. Some studies suggest that the human risk was probably lower than the rat studies indicated, and the ban may have been more precautionary than strictly necessary. But regardless, the ban became a defining moment in food safety, showing the public that even small, seemingly innocent additives could carry health risks. Let's talk about taste and experience, though, because that's what most people remember. Red dye number 2 itself didn't have a flavor. It was all about the visual impact. It made things look more fun, more appetizing, and more artificially delicious. Kids loved it, adults bought it, and marketers loved it. The bright red color made ordinary snacks feel special, exciting, and memorable, which is why the dye was so widely used in the first place. Its effect wasn't on taste, it was on emotion and perception. Food suddenly looked more appealing, even if it didn't taste any different. Here's a fun anecdote. In the 1960s, red dye number 2 appeared in practically every red food product you could think of. Jellies, candies, sodas, and even tomato-flavored snacks. Kids grew up associating bright red foods with sweetness, fun, and excitement. So even after the ban, people remembered those vivid, nostalgic foods fondly, but with a new awareness that sometimes fun can come with a hidden cost. It's a little unsettling, but also fascinating how food colors can influence emotions and perceptions long before you even taste the product. Now imagine this scenario. You're in a 1960s kitchen preparing gelatin desserts for a party. The jiggly red dessert wobbles on the plate, looking perfect and irresistible.
everyone loves it. It's visually stunning. But behind the scenes, there's a chemical in that bright red hue that scientists are studying for potential cancer risks. That mix of delicious delight and hidden danger is exactly what makes the story of red dye number 2 so gripping and memorable. Red dye number 2 is a perfect example of how a seemingly harmless additive can become a public health issue, changing the way we think about food forever. It shows that food isn't just about taste, it's about color, perception, and science, and how each ingredient can carry a story far beyond the plate. It also teaches a subtle lesson that even foods that seem ordinary or fun might have hidden risks, and regulation and science are crucial in keeping us safe. So here's a question for you. Would you trust a food additive today without knowing its history and risks? Could you appreciate the nostalgic, bright red foods of your childhood while understanding the cautionary tale behind them? Red dye number 2 isn't just a banned chemical. It's a story about human curiosity, risk, and the evolution of food safety. Every bright red bite from the past carries a lesson about vigilance, awareness, and how science shapes our plates. In the end, red dye number 2 isn't just about food. It's about culture, emotion, and the delicate balance between fun and safety.
Mopane worms. All right, now let's dive into something that might make some of you raise an eyebrow or even your stomach. Mopane worms. Yep. We're talking about actual caterpillars, not some fancy candy or health supplement. In southern Africa, these worms are considered a delicacy, but for a lot of people around the world, the idea of eating insects is controversial or even gross. Mopane worms are a perfect example of how cultural norms shape what we consider food. So, what are Mopane worms exactly? Despite the name, they're not worms. They're the larval stage of the emperor moth. They're called Mopane worms because they feed on the leaves of the Mopane tree, which is native to countries like Zimbabwe, Botswana, and South Africa. When in season, communities harvest these worms in huge quantities, dry or cook them, and serve them as a protein-rich snack or meal. Think of them as superfood insects, loaded with protein, essential fats, and minerals like iron and calcium. Here's why they're controversial. For many cultures outside of southern Africa, the idea of eating insects feels unnatural or even disgusting. We're used to seeing meat as beef, chicken, or pork, not larvae crawling on trees. That cultural barrier has made Mopane worms a food that sparks curiosity, fear, and sometimes outright rejection in other parts of the world. And yet, for those who grew up eating them, they're just another ingredient in a healthy traditional diet. Now, let's talk about taste and preparation. Mopane worms are usually harvested, boiled, and then either dried or fried. Once dried, they can be stored for months, making them a reliable source of protein even when fresh food is scarce. People describe the taste as nutty, earthy, and slightly smoky, especially when cooked over an open flame. They can be eaten alone as a snack, added to stews, or mixed with vegetables and grains. For locals, it's not just food, it's heritage and survival rolled into one. Here's a fun fact. Mopane worms are nutritionally incredible. A 100-gram serving of dried worms can provide up to 60% protein, plus healthy fats and essential minerals like iron and calcium. That makes them more nutritious than many traditional meats, and they're also eco-friendly, requiring far less land, water, and feed than conventional livestock. So while the idea of eating them might feel strange to outsiders, from a sustainability and nutrition perspective, they're fantastic. Now, let's imagine the experience. You're in southern Africa during the harvesting season. People are climbing Mopane trees, carefully plucking the worms and tossing them into baskets. Later, you see them boiled in a pot over fire, filling the air with a smoky, earthy aroma. You try a bite. Crunchy on the outside, soft inside, with a nutty flavor that surprises your taste buds. It's different, unfamiliar, but oddly satisfying.
The cultural shock fades when you experience the taste and the tradition behind it. The controversy comes down to perception and culture. Insects are eaten by billions of people worldwide, but in many Western countries, the idea triggers disgust or fear. Mopane worms challenge our assumptions about what counts as edible or normal. They're a reminder that food norms are not universal, and what seems strange to one culture can be delicious and essential in another. Here's another interesting angle. Mopane worms also play a critical role in local economies. Communities harvest them not just to eat, but to sell to markets, providing income in rural areas. Dried worms can be exported, making them part of a global trade in edible insects. This adds another layer. Mopane worms are both a cultural delicacy and a commodity, blending tradition with modern economics. Now, imagine trying them for the first time. There's hesitation, maybe even disgust at first. But then you taste the crunch, the nutty flavor, the earthy aroma, and suddenly you understand why generations have eaten them. It's not just about survival, it's about flavor, nutrition, and cultural identity. Mopane worms teach a subtle lesson. Our ideas of food are shaped by what we're used to, and stepping outside our comfort zone can open our minds and our taste buds. Mopane worms are a perfect example of how food can challenge perceptions, sustain communities, and carry cultural significance. They remind us that the line between delicious and disgusting is often cultural, and that edible insects are more normal, nutritious, and sustainable than most people realize. Eating them isn't just about the taste. It's about connecting with heritage, ecology, and global food diversity. So here's a question for you. Would you try Mopane worms and given the chance? Could you look past the initial shock and appreciate their flavor, nutrition, and cultural importance? They're not just a snack. They're a story on a plate, a bite of tradition, sustainability, and adventure all rolled into one crunchy morsel. Mopane worms aren't just insects. They're a delicious lesson in culture, nutrition, and challenging assumptions. Every bite is a reminder that food is more than taste. It's history, identity, and perspective. So the next time you hear someone dismissing insects as gross, remember, for millions of people, Mopane worms are a prized, nutritious, and delicious part of life.
Bird's nest soup. All right, let's dive into something that might sound extravagant, exotic, and a little bit creepy all at once. Bird's nest soup. You may have heard of it in fancy restaurants, maybe even as a luxurious delicacy in Asian cuisine. But here's the catch. It's controversial and even banned in some places because of the way the nests are harvested. And yes, the main ingredient isn't just called a bird's nest, it actually comes from birds, specifically the edible nest swiftlet. So what makes these nests so special? Unlike most birds that build nests out of twigs and leaves, swiftlets use their saliva to construct their nests. Over time, the saliva hardens, forming a gelatinous, almost translucent structure. These nests are then harvested, cleaned, and used to make soup. The reason people prize them so highly is that they're believed to have health benefits. Think improving skin complexion, boosting immunity, and even enhancing overall vitality. In some cultures, bird's nest soup is seen as the ultimate wellness food, almost like a superfood centuries before that term existed. Now here's where it gets controversial. Harvesting these nests isn't as simple as plucking twigs from a tree. The birds build their nests on cliffs or inside dark caves, and harvesting often disturbs or even destroys the nesting sites. In some cases, eggs or baby birds are harmed, which has raised serious concerns about wildlife conservation. Because of this, some governments have banned the collection or sale of birds' nests to protect swiftlet populations. It's a classic case of human desire versus environmental responsibility. Here's the interesting part. Despite the risks, bird's nest soup is still incredibly popular, especially in places like China, Hong Kong, and Singapore. Restaurants sell it for hundreds of dollars per bowl, making it one of the most expensive foods in the world. People argue that the nests are worth it for the texture, rarity, and supposed health benefits. The soup itself is usually mild in flavor, almost like a lightly savory broth, but the nests give it a unique gelatinous, chewy texture that food enthusiasts love. It's not about strong taste, it's about mouthfeel and the luxurious experience of eating something rare. Let's talk experience. Imagine sitting in a high-end restaurant, a bowl of steaming bird's nest soup placed before you. You scoop up the delicate strands of nest and notice how they glide smoothly, almost melting in your mouth, leaving a subtle, slightly sweet taste behind. The experience is delicate, refined, and indulgent, and it's meant to convey status, health, and cultural tradition in all one bite. For many, it's as much about prestige and history as it is about flavor. Here's a fun fact. Some sellers cultivate nests in controlled environments called swiftlet houses. These are essentially artificial caves or structures where birds can safely build nests without damaging wild populations. This practice allows people to enjoy bird's nest soup while reducing environmental impact, although wild harvested nests are still considered the most valuable. Think of it like farmed versus wild-caught seafood. The flavor might be similar, but collectors often pay a premium for wild sources. Now imagine this scenario. You're curious about exotic foods, and someone offers you bird's nest soup. There's hesitation. After all, you're literally eating hardened bird saliva. But then you taste it. The soup is smooth, nourishing, and surprisingly subtle. You realize that this delicacy isn't just about shock value. It's centuries of tradition, culture, and craftsmanship in a single bowl. At the same time, you can't help thinking about the ethical questions about the birds and their nests, and whether this luxury comes at too high a cost. That tension is exactly what makes bird's nest soup fascinating and controversial. Bird's nest soup is a perfect example of luxury food intersecting with ethics. It's treasured for its rarity, texture, and supposed health benefits, yet criticized for the ecological and ethical implications of harvesting it. The controversy reminds us that some delicacies aren't just about taste. They're about human choices, environmental stewardship, and cultural priorities. Every bite carries not just flavor, but history, status, and responsibility. So here's a question for you. Would you try bird's nest soup knowing the ethical concerns, or will the idea of consuming bird saliva stop you? Could you appreciate its cultural and historical significance while reflecting on the impact of your food choices? It's a dish that challenges perception, combining luxury, tradition, and environmental awareness in every gelatinous bite. In the end, bird's nest soup isn't just an exotic dish, it's a story about human desire, culture, and the delicate balance between indulgence and conservation. Every bowl is a lesson in ethics, history, and culinary art, reminding us that sometimes the most luxurious foods carry the heaviest responsibilities.
Blood sausage. All right, let's talk about something that might make some of you squirm, gag, or at least raise an eyebrow. Blood sausage. Yes, we're diving into the world of sausage made with actual animal blood. It's a classic food in many countries, but it's also controversial and taboo in others. The idea of eating blood can feel strange, even gross, if you didn't grow up with it. But for many cultures, blood sausage is not just food. It's tradition, flavor, and resourcefulness
all rolled into one. So, what exactly is blood sausage? Depending on the country, it can go by different names. Morcilla in Spain, black pudding in the UK, boudin noir in France, or Blutwurst in Germany. The basic idea is simple. Pig, cow, or sheep blood is mixed with fat, grains, and spices, then stuffed into a casing and cooked. Sounds simple, but the result is rich, savory, and packed with umami flavor. It's hearty, earthy, and comforting, especially when served with onions, potatoes, or other accompaniments. Here's why it's controversial. Many cultures view blood as unclean or taboo, either for religious, ethical, or personal reasons. In places where consuming blood is frowned upon, blood sausage is considered disgusting or shocking. In some countries, it's even restricted or banned due to hygiene concerns, since raw blood can carry bacteria if not handled properly. So the controversy isn't just about taste. It's deeply cultural and sometimes legal. Despite this, blood sausage has a long and storied history. It dates back thousands of years and was a practical way for people to use every part of the animal instead of letting it go to waste. Blood is highly nutritious, packed with iron, protein, and essential minerals, making it a vital food source in times or regions where resources were limited. In many traditional cuisines, nothing goes to waste, and blood sausage is a prime example of this resourcefulness. Now let's talk about taste and experience. Blood sausage has a unique, rich flavor that's hard to compare to anything else. The grain or filler, often rice, barley, or oats, adds texture, while spices like nutmeg, pepper, or paprika create a layered, aromatic profile. When cooked correctly, it's tender and slightly crumbly, with a deep, earthy, slightly metallic taste from the blood. The first bite might surprise some newcomers, but for those who grew up eating it, it's comfort food at its finest. Here's a fun fact. Blood sausage is actually very versatile. In the UK, black pudding is often served for breakfast with eggs and bacon. In Spain, morcilla can appear in stews or tapas. In France, boudin noir is sometimes served with apples or mashed potatoes. And in Germany, Blutwurst is enjoyed in a variety of hearty dishes. So while the idea of eating blood may feel shocking, the culinary applications are surprisingly diverse and delicious. Imagine this scenario. You're at a traditional European breakfast. On your plate sits a thick slice of black pudding, slightly crisped on the pan. You take a bite and the rich, earthy flavors hit your tongue. It's hearty, savory, and warming. You realize that this is comfort food for generations, something that's more about tradition, nutrition, and flavor than shock value. That's the paradox of blood sausage. It can seem taboo at first, but it's actually deeply satisfying and culturally significant. Blood sausage also highlights how culture shapes what we eat. For some, the idea of eating blood is unthinkable. For others, it's a prized delicacy, rich in history and nutrition. This contrast shows how deeply food is tied to identity, tradition, and societal norms. It's not just about taste, it's about values, beliefs, and perspective. Here's another angle. Blood sausage is surprisingly nutritious dense. Blood is high in iron, making it beneficial for people with anemia or low iron levels. Combined with grains and fat, it's calorie-rich and sustaining, which made it a staple in working-class and rural communities. Historically, it wasn't just a treat, it was essential nutrition, a way to get maximum sustenance from every part of the animal. Now, imagine trying it for the first time.
You might hesitate, thinking about the blood content, but then you take a bite. The flavors are complex, rich, and comforting, and suddenly the taboo seems less important. You start to understand why it has endured for centuries, across countries, cultures, and generations. Blood sausage is not just food, it's history, culture, and ingenuity on a plate. So here's a question for you. Could you eat blood sausage, knowing the cultural significance, nutrition, and culinary tradition behind it? Could you look past the initial shock and appreciate it as a delicacy that has sustained generations? Blood sausage is not just about taste. It's about heritage, practicality, and the courage to embrace foods outside your comfort zone. In the end, blood sausage is more than a controversial food. It's a story of resourcefulness, tradition, and cultural perspective. Every slice tells a tale of history, survival, and flavor, reminding us that the most shocking foods can also be the most meaningful and satisfying.
Foie gras ice cream. All right, let's get ready to explore something that's going to shock your taste buds and your moral compass at the same time. Foie gras ice cream. Yep, you read that right. Ice cream, sweet, creamy, cold, combined with foie gras, the rich, fatty liver of force-fed ducks or geese. It's the kind of food that makes people say, "Wait, what?" and "Should I be horrified or excited?" at the same time. So first, let's break down what foie gras is. Foie gras is considered a luxury delicacy in French cuisine, prized for its buttery texture and rich flavor. The process to make it, however, is highly controversial. Ducks or geese are force-fed large amounts of food over a period of time to enlarge their livers. This process, called gavage, is considered by many animal welfare groups to be cruel and inhumane. That's the root of the controversy, and it carries over when foie gras is turned into ice cream. Now, imagine the flavor. Foie gras is fatty, savory, and rich, almost like the ultimate indulgent butteriness. Ice cream is sweet, creamy, and cold. Mixing the two creates a unique, sweet, and savory experience that's unusual, shocking, and designed to wow adventurous eaters. The contrast is part of the appeal, the velvety richness of foie gras with the familiar comfort of ice cream. Chefs who make this dessert are trying to push culinary boundaries, creating something that's luxurious, surprising, and memorable. But here's why it's banned in several countries. The animal welfare concerns surrounding foie gras production are serious. Many countries, including the UK, India, and some U.S. states, have restricted or banned the sale and production of foie gras, and by extension, foie gras ice cream. Governments and activists argue that no dessert is worth animal suffering, making it a food that's both extreme and ethically controversial. Eating it is literally a choice between culinary adventure and moral reflection. Here's a fun fact. Foie gras ice cream isn't just about shock value. Some chefs balance the foie gras with ingredients like honey, caramel, or fruit compotes, creating a layered flavor profile that surprises the palate. The idea is to take the richness of foie gras and play it off sweet or acidic elements, making it less overwhelming and more culinary art than just novelty. Eating it is meant to be a sophisticated experience, not just a gimmick. Now, let's talk about experiences. Imagine sitting in a high-end restaurant, a small scoop of foie gras ice cream placed before you. You take your first bite. It's creamy, buttery, sweet, and savory all at once. The flavor is complex, intense, and unlike anything you've tasted before. You can feel the luxury in every bite, but at the same time, you're thinking about how it was made, about the ducks or geese, and the moral weight of the experience. It's a food that engages both your taste buds and your conscience. The controversy also sparks debate about modern gastronomy. Should chefs push the boundaries of flavor at any cost, or should ethics come first? Foie gras ice cream is a perfect example of this tension. It's innovative, rare, and extreme, but it forces diners to reflect on where food comes from and how it's produced. For some, it's an exciting indulgence. For others, it's a culinary horror story. That contrast makes it endlessly fascinating. Here's another interesting angle. Because of bans and restrictions, foie gras ice cream is rare and often only available in exclusive restaurants or pop-up events. Its scarcity adds to the luxury factor, but also to the ethical tension. Every bite is a reminder of the moral dilemma behind indulgence. It's the kind of dish that makes people talk, debate, and think, which is exactly what the chef intended. Imagine serving this at a dinner party. Guests take their first spoonfuls, faces lighting up with surprise and curiosity. Some love it immediately, marveling at the unique sweet-savory combination. Others hesitate, questioning the ethics of what they're eating. Suddenly, food becomes more than sustenance. It becomes conversation, reflection, and experience. That's what makes foie gras ice cream so extreme and controversial. In the end, foie gras ice cream isn't just about flavor. It's about luxury, culinary experimentation, and moral debate. Every bite challenges your palate and your perspective, asking questions like, how far should we go for innovation? What price are we willing to pay for indulgence? Should ethics limit creativity in cuisine? It's a dessert that's tasty, shocking, and thought-provoking all at once. So, would you try it? Could you enjoy the luxurious flavors while grappling with the ethical implications? Foie gras ice cream is more than a dessert. It's a lesson in indulgence, ethics, and the extremes of culinary art. Each tiny scoop is rich, creamy, controversial, and unforgettable. A perfect example of how food can entertain, delight, and provoke all at once.
Gorilla pepper soup. All right, let's dive into something that's going to raise eyebrows, shock your imagination, and maybe even make you gasp. Gorilla pepper soup. Yes, you heard that right. This is a rare and extremely controversial dish. So rare, in fact, that most people have never encountered it. And in many places, it's actually illegal. It's the kind of dish that makes you stop and think, wait, people actually eat gorillas? First, let's unpack what this is. Gorilla pepper soup is a fictional or extremely rare dish that supposedly involves using gorilla meat combined with traditional African spices to make a rich, spicy, aromatic soup. In theory, it's meant to be hearty,
warming and full of complex flavors, blending pepper, local herbs, and the deep, gamey taste of the meat. In reality, though, it's almost impossible to legally try it because gorillas are critically endangered. That's where the ethical and legal controversy comes in. So why is this dish controversial? Well, gorillas are protected by international law. They are considered one of the closest relatives to humans genetically, and their populations have been decimated by habitat loss, poaching, and disease. Eating gorilla meat is therefore not only illegal in most countries, but it's also widely considered morally and ethically unacceptable. This dish sits at the intersection of human curiosity, cultural taboos, and conservation ethics, a perfect storm for controversy. Here's where it gets interesting. Historically, in some extremely remote regions, gorilla hunting did occur as part of survival or tribal practices. The meat was considered a luxury or sacred food, not everyday sustenance. But modern conservation efforts have made it illegal, and for good reason. Gorillas are slow to reproduce, and poaching even a few individuals can devastate an entire population. Eating gorilla meat today is not just taboo, it's a threat to survival for the species. Let's imagine the culinary experience, hypothetically. People describe it as deeply gamey, rich and intense, much like other exotic meats, such as venison or wild boar, but more pronounced. The pepper soup itself would be spicy, aromatic, and full-bodied, intended to balance the richness of the meat. Chefs or traditional cooks who have prepared similar exotic meat soups often use local herbs, onions, garlic, and chili to create a warming, hearty broth. It's designed to nourish, excite the palate, and even impress diners. But the ethical and legal stakes make it nearly impossible to enjoy legitimately. Now let's talk ethics. Gorilla pepper soup raises questions about what humans consider food and whether curiosity should ever trump conservation. Unlike domestic animals, gorillas are wild, intelligent, and endangered. Hunting them for food isn't just controversial, it's illegal and ecologically destructive. Conservationists argue that no culinary thrill is worth endangering a species. This makes gorilla pepper soup one of the most extreme examples of controversial food. It's not just about taste, texture, or novelty, it's about life, ethics, and responsibility. Here's a fun and sobering fact. While fictional or extremely rare in practice, gorilla pepper soup has appeared in literature, media, and urban myths, often used to illustrate human greed, exoticism, or taboo breaking in food culture. It's a conversation starter. People debate whether curiosity about unusual foods should be balanced against ethical responsibility and the consequences for wildlife. It's not just a dish, it's a moral thought experiment on a plate. Imagine sitting down, hypothetically, with a bowl of gorilla pepper soup. The aroma is rich and spicy, the broth thick and flavorful. You take a spoonful, tasting the hearty, gamey richness with layers of pepper and herbs. But as you taste it, your mind can't help but wonder, is this right? Should I be eating this? What are the consequences? That tension is exactly why this dish is so fascinating and controversial. It's not just about taste, it's about ethics, law, and conservation. From a cultural perspective, gorilla pepper soup reminds us that food norms are highly variable across the world, but they are also constrained by modern ethics and global awareness. What might have once been considered a rare treat or survival food is now recognized as illegal, unethical, and dangerous to biodiversity. It challenges us to ask, if we can eat it, should we? Sometimes the answer is clear. Some foods are too controversial to ever be justified. Here's another layer. This dish sparks discussion about exotic meats and sustainability. While humans have historically eaten a wide range of animals, modern society increasingly draws lines based on species preservation, ethics, and environmental impact. Gorilla pepper soup sits on the extreme end of the spectrum, highlighting how curiosity and tradition collide with conservation imperatives. So here's a question for you. Would you even want to try gorilla pepper soup, knowing the ethical and legal implications? Could you imagine the taste while grappling with the moral weight of your choice? Most people would say no, and that's exactly the point. This dish exists more as a provocative idea than a practical food item, forcing reflection on what we eat, why we eat it, and what we should avoid.
Cassava leaves. All right, let's get into something that might make you double-check your garden veggies. Cassava leaves. You might know cassava as the root that gets turned into tapioca or used in flour. But its leaves are also edible, if prepared correctly. And here's the kicker. If you eat them raw, they can actually be poisonous. Yep, what looks like a leafy green could secretly contain cyanogenic glycosides, chemicals that release cyanide when your body digests them. That's right, cyanide in your salad, which is why preparation is absolutely key. So what exactly are cassava leaves? They come from the cassava plant, native to South America, but now grown all over Africa, Asia, and other tropical regions. The roots are starchy and widely consumed, but the leaves are a staple green vegetable in many cultures, especially in African cuisine. They're rich in protein, vitamins, and minerals, making them a valuable part of the diet. The catch is that raw leaves contain cyanogenic glycosides, which your body definitely does not want to handle unprocessed. Here's where it gets controversial. Eating raw cassava leaves can cause cyanide poisoning, leading to symptoms like dizziness, nausea, headache, and in severe cases, even death. But when cooked properly, boiled, steamed, or fermented, the cyanide is neutralized and the leaves become a safe, nutritious, and delicious food. This is a perfect example of how traditional knowledge keeps people safe, because generations of cooks have figured out the right way to prepare them. If, without that knowledge, what seems like an innocent vegetable can be deadly. Now let's talk taste. Once cooked, cassava leaves have a slightly bitter, earthy flavor, similar to spinach but with a deeper, more robust green taste. They're often cooked with onions, garlic, palm oil, or peanuts, turning them into rich, savory stews or side dishes. The texture becomes tender but slightly fibrous, giving the dish a satisfying bite. For many communities, cassava leaves aren't just food. They're comfort, nutrition, and tradition, all on a plate. Here's a fun fact. In places like the Democratic Republic of Congo, Nigeria, and other parts of West and Central Africa, cassava leaves are sometimes fermented or pounded into a paste, further reducing any cyanide content and enhancing flavor. The process takes time and care, but it transforms potentially dangerous leaves into a culinary staple. It's fascinating how traditional cooking techniques turn toxic ingredients into nutritious meals. Let's imagine the experience. You're in a small village kitchen somewhere in Africa. Fresh cassava leaves are spread out, washed and chopped. They go into a large pot with onions, garlic, palm oil, and peanuts, simmering over an open flame. The air fills with a rich, earthy aroma, promising something nourishing and satisfying. When it's done, you take a bite. The flavor is deep and comforting, and you realize that a plant that could have been deadly raw has been transformed into a delicious, nutritious dish. It's like magic.
culinary magic. Here's another important angle. Cassava leaves show us the intersection of food, science, and tradition. The leaves are naturally toxic raw because of cyanogenic glycosides, yet human ingenuity have turned them into a safe, essential food source. It's a reminder that food safety often depends on knowledge passed down through generations. Without this knowledge, what seems ordinary can be dangerous. Now let's think about modern implications. With globalization, people might try to cook cassava leaves without knowing the right techniques. That's why awareness is key. Always boil, steam, or ferment. Avoid raw consumption and enjoy the leaves safely. They're high in protein, iron, calcium, and vitamins, making them a great addition to your diet when prepared correctly. So this isn't just a story about danger. It's about how humans learn to transform nature's hazards into nutrition. Here's a thought-provoking question. If you had no knowledge of traditional preparation, would you risk trying raw cassava leaves? Most of us would probably stick to the safe option, but it's incredible to realize that in some cultures, people rely on this knowledge daily, turning potentially lethal leaves into vital nutrition. It's a testament to human adaptability, observation, and culinary creativity. In the end, cassava leaves are a lesson in caution, culture, and culinary ingenuity. Raw, they're toxic. Cooked, they're nutrition and delicious. They remind us that not all vegetables are inherently safe. Some require careful preparation, knowledge, and respect for tradition. Every bite of properly prepared cassava leaves carries the weight of science, safety, and centuries of culinary wisdom. So, would you take the risk and try them raw? Or would you follow tradition and cook them carefully, appreciating the knowledge and skill it takes to make them safe and tasty? Cassava leaves teach a simple but powerful lesson. Nature gives us both food and danger, and it's up to humans to know the difference.
Matsutake mushrooms. All right, let's dive into something that sounds like a gourmet dream and a conservation headache rolled into one: Matsutake mushrooms. If you've never heard of them, don't worry. They're not your everyday grocery store mushrooms. In fact, they're some of the rarest and most expensive mushrooms in the world. And that rarity is what makes them both highly prized and controversial. First off, what are Matsutake mushrooms? They're wild mushrooms that grow in pine forests, primarily in Japan, Korea, and parts of North America. Unlike regular mushrooms, Matsutake have a distinctive, spicy, earthy aroma, often described as a combination of pine, cinnamon, and nutty flavors. People consider that aroma almost magical. In Japan, Matsutake mushrooms are a symbol of autumn, luxury, and culinary sophistication, sometimes selling for hundreds or even thousands of dollars per kilogram. That's right, one mushroom can be worth more than your dinner for two. Now, here's where it gets controversial. Matsutake mushrooms are extremely sensitive to their environment. They grow under specific pine trees, require certain soil conditions, and rely on complex symbiotic relationships with tree roots. Because of deforestation, pollution, and climate change, their natural habitats are shrinking. Overharvesting is also a big issue. Hunters sometimes strip forests bare to collect these prized fungi, leaving the ecosystem vulnerable. This combination of rarity, high demand, and ecological sensitivity makes Matsutake mushrooms a hot topic in conservation circles. Despite the controversy, people go to great lengths to enjoy them. Chefs and home cooks prize Matsutake for their unique flavor and aroma, which can't be replicated by other mushrooms. They're typically cooked very simply, steamed, grilled, or added to soups so that their delicate, spicy, earthy essence shines through. Imagine slicing one carefully,
taking a whiff and immediately being hit by that unmistakable matsutake fragrance. It's earthy, but almost sweet, woodsy, but fresh, like autumn itself in a bite. Here's a fun fact. Matsutake mushrooms have been harvested and celebrated in Japan for centuries. They're not just food, they're cultural treasures, often given as gifts or served at special occasions. The very act of hunting them is considered a skill and a tradition passed down through generations. That's why the controversy isn't just about scarcity, it's also about balancing tradition, luxury, and sustainability. Let's talk experience. Picture yourself in a quiet Japanese forest during autumn. Pine needles crunch underfoot as you carefully search for a mushroom with the perfect cap and stem. You find it. Carefully, you harvest it, inhaling that signature matsutake aroma. Later, in a restaurant or home kitchen, it's grilled lightly or simmered in a delicate broth, letting the mushroom's flavor shine through. The first bite hits you, a combination of earthy, spicy, and slightly nutty notes, clean, elegant, and unforgettable. That's why matsutake mushrooms are considered worth every penny, even with the ethical questions hanging over them. Now let's discuss the controversy a bit deeper. Because matsutake are so rare, harvesting them irresponsibly can damage ecosystems. The mushrooms play a key role in forest health, forming symbiotic relationships with trees and helping nutrient cycles. Overharvesting disrupts these systems, which is why conservationists urge sustainable harvesting practices, like taking only what you need, leaving some behind, and protecting forests. It's a delicate balance between human desire and ecological responsibility. Here's another interesting angle. Global demand has shifted harvesting pressures. Matsutake are not just valued in Japan, they're exported worldwide, fetching high prices in markets across Asia, North America, and Europe. That global demand increases the risk of overharvesting, making sustainability even more critical. It's a perfect example of how a rare natural food can become a luxury item with ecological consequences. Imagine sitting down for a matsutake feast. A small slice, lightly grilled, hits your tongue. The aroma rises in the steam, filling the air with that distinctive, piney, spicy scent. You savor it slowly, appreciating both its taste and its rarity. And as you eat, you think about the forests, the hunters, and the delicate ecosystems that make this mushroom possible. Every bite is a reminder of the intersection of flavor, culture, and conservation. In the end, matsutake mushrooms are more than just an exotic food. They're a story of rarity, luxury, and responsibility. They remind us that some delicacies come with ethical questions and ecological stakes, and that enjoying the world's most exquisite flavors sometimes requires thoughtfulness, restraint, and respect for nature. So, would you hunt for them, savor them, and appreciate their rarity, or pause and consider the cost to the forests that make them possible? Matsutake mushrooms aren't just food. They're an experience, a tradition, and a lesson in sustainable indulgence.
Sea urchin roe. All right, let's dive into something that's luxurious, exotic, and borderline weird, at least to the uninitiated. Sea urchin roe, better known as uni. If you've ever scrolled through Instagram sushi photos or watched a high-end Japanese culinary show, you've probably seen it. These bright orange or yellow lobes, creamy and delicate, sitting on rice or sashimi. To some, it's the pinnacle of seafood indulgence. To others, it's a little intimidating. And yes, in some countries, it's actually banned or restricted. So, what exactly is uni? Uni is the gonads of sea urchins, the reproductive organs that produce roe. Don't let that freak you out too much.
It's considered a delicacy because of its unique creamy texture and briny, slightly sweet ocean flavor. In Japan, uni is highly prized, often served in sushi restaurants or as a topping on rice bowls. The experience of eating it is all about texture and subtle flavor, smooth, buttery, and melting in your mouth, with a flavor reminiscent of the sea. Now, here's where the controversy comes in. Uni is extremely perishable. Unlike cooked seafood, raw uni has a short shelf life and requires ultra-fresh handling. If it's stored improperly, it can become unsafe to eat, carrying risks of foodborne illness. Because of these safety concerns, some countries, including parts of the United States, restrict the import or sale of raw uni. Health agencies worry that if it's shipped long distances or not kept at the right temperature, it can make people seriously sick. So, while it's a delicacy in one place, it's banned in another, not because the food itself is inherently bad, but because freshness is crucial for safety. Let's talk taste. Uni has a creamy, custard-like consistency that's unlike anything else in the ocean. Some describe the flavor as sweet, salty, and briny all at once, with a lingering oceanic finish. It's not fishy, it's delicate, luxurious, and highly prized by sushi enthusiasts. Texture is key here. Bite too hard and it can crumble. Bite gently and it melts on your tongue. Some chefs enhance the flavor with soy sauce, lemon, or wasabi, but the real goal is to highlight the natural freshness and complexity of the roe. Here's a fun fact. In Japan, uni is so valued that its price can rival caviar. In some high-end sushi restaurants, you might pay hundreds of dollars for just a few pieces, especially if it's from the most prized varieties, like buffaloon or murasaki uni. The price reflects not just scarcity, but the delicate handling required to keep it fresh and safe. Chefs treat uni almost like jewelry, handling it carefully to preserve its texture and flavor. Now imagine the experience. You're at a sushi counter in Tokyo. The chef places a piece of uni on your plate. The aroma is subtly oceanic, not overpowering. You take a bite, and it's creamy, rich, and melts instantly. The sweetness of the roe balances perfectly with the salty hint of the ocean. It's an experience that's indulgent, fleeting, and unforgettable. But at the same time, you know that freshness is everything. Without it, the delicate texture turns mushy, and the flavor can become unpleasant or even unsafe. That's why some countries hesitate to allow raw uni imports, prioritizing public safety. Here's another interesting angle. Uni isn't just a Japanese delicacy. It's eaten in Italy, Ricci di Mare, Chile, and other coastal countries, each with their own way of harvesting and preparing it. Despite these variations, the challenge is universal, keeping it fresh and safe while preserving that luxurious taste. The controversy isn't about flavor. It's about handling, storage, and food safety. Uni also sparks debate among food enthusiasts. Should people risk eating it raw if it might be unsafe, or should regulations strictly protect consumers? Some argue that the risk is part of the thrill, especially for adventurers seeking rare, exotic experiences. Others say that no culinary pleasure is worth potentially dangerous foodborne illness. This debate is exactly why uni sits on the line between delicacy and restricted food. In the end, sea urchin roe teaches us that not all controversial foods are inherently bad. Some, like uni, are controversial because of safety, handling, and perishable nature rather than taste or ethics. Eating it requires trust in the chef, knowledge of sourcing, and respect for the delicate process that keeps this oceanic gem safe to consume. Uni is luxurious, exotic, and memorable, an indulgence that's as much about freshness and care as it is about flavor. So, would you try uni? Could you embrace the creamy, oceanic richness while acknowledging the delicate handling it requires? Eating uni isn't just about taste, it's about experience, trust, and understanding how much effort goes into keeping a simple bite both delicious and safe.
Wattle seed coffee. All right, let's jump into something that sounds a little exotic, a little quirky, and might make you question your morning routine. Wattle seed coffee from Australia. You might be thinking, coffee from seeds I've never heard of? Exactly. Wattle seed coffee is a unique twist on a familiar beverage made from the roasted seeds of the acacia tree, known as wattles. It's not your average espresso or drip coffee, and it comes with a bit of controversy, mostly because of allergy potential and rarity. So what is wattle seed coffee? The wattle seed comes from various species of acacia trees native to Australia. Indigenous Australians have been using wattle seed for thousands of years, roasting and grinding it to make a nutty, aromatic flour, porridge, and yes, even coffee-like drinks. When roasted and brewed, wattle seed produces a rich, earthy, slightly chocolatey flavor, sometimes with hints of hazelnut or spice. It's caffeine-free or very low in caffeine, making it a nice alternative for people who love coffee flavor without the jitters. Here's where it gets interesting and a little controversial. Wattle seed is rare and not widely available outside Australia. That rarity makes it a specialty ingredient highly prized in gourmet cooking and beverages. But the bigger controversy comes from allergy potential. Acacia seeds contain proteins that can trigger allergic reactions in some people, especially those sensitive to peanuts or other legumes. Because it's not a common ingredient worldwide, consumption can be risky if someone isn't aware of potential allergens. That's why some health authorities urge caution, and why it hasn't reached mainstream coffee culture yet. Let's talk taste. Imagine your usual coffee, but instead of bitter roasted beans, you have a smooth, nutty, earthy drink with subtle chocolatey undertones. Wattle seed coffee doesn't taste exactly like coffee, but it gives you a warm, comforting beverage that can stand on its own or blend with milk, spices, or sweeteners. It's versatile. You can brew it as a hot drink, use it in baking, or even incorporate it into ice cream. The flavor is robust, aromatic, and satisfying, without the acidity or sharpness of regular coffee. Here's a fun fact. Indigenous Australians have used wattle seed as a major food source for millennia, long before Europeans arrived in Australia. The seeds were roasted, ground, and mixed with water or milk-like substitutes to make nourishing drinks and porridge. Today, modern chefs and baristas have revived the practice, using wattle seed coffee in gourmet cafes, craft beverages, and specialty desserts. It's a fusion of tradition and modern culinary creativity, which makes it not just a drink, but a cultural experience. Now, let's imagine the experience. You're in a small Australian cafe, the air filled with earthy, nutty aromas. A barista hands you a cup of wattle seed coffee. You take a sip. The flavor is rich, deep, and slightly sweet, with the roasted aroma reminding you of hazelnut and chocolate. There's no sharp bitterness, no jitters, just a soothing, satisfying warmth. And as you drink, you can appreciate that this cup carries thousands of years of indigenous culinary wisdom, blended with modern culinary creativity, which makes it not just a drink, but a cultural experience. Now, here's the important part. While wattle seed coffee is delicious, you have to be aware of allergy risks. Some people who are allergic to nuts or legumes might experience reactions, which is why it's considered controversial in global markets. Not every cafe labels it properly, and it's not always regulated in countries where it's imported. That's the fine line it walks. A rare, wonderful beverage with amazing flavor, but one that requires caution. Let's explore another angle. Rarity. Wattle seed isn't produced en masse scales like Arabica or Robusta coffee. It's harvested from wild or cultivated acacia trees, often in small batches. That makes it a gourmet, artisanal product, and sometimes a pricey one. The combination of rare availability, unique flavor, and allergy concerns makes it a food item that's both desirable and controversial at the same time. It's a classic case of luxury and caution coexisting. Now think about it this way. Wattle seed coffee isn't just a drink. It's a connection to history, culture, and nature. Every cup carries the knowledge of Indigenous Australians, the care of modern growers, and the careful roasting that brings out its full flavor. It's exotic, yet familiar, comforting, yet sophisticated, and it challenges our idea of what coffee can be, a reminder that the world is full of flavors waiting to be discovered. So, would you try wattle seed coffee? Could you appreciate the earthy, nutty richness while being mindful of its allergy potential? It's a drink that's both an adventure and a lesson, teaching us about Indigenous food traditions, rare ingredients, and the balance between culinary curiosity and safety. One sip is enough to transport you to Australian landscapes, centuries of tradition, and a truly unique taste experience.
Sanakji, live squid. All right, get ready for something that's as extreme as it sounds. We're talking about Sanakji live squid, the live squid dish from Korea. And yes, it's different from the live octopus dish, Sanakji with octopus, though the idea is similar. You eat it while it's still wriggling. To most people, that's both fascinating and terrifying. The dish is considered a delicacy, but it also comes with a serious risk of choking, which is why it's controversial and sometimes even restricted. So what is Sanakji live squid exactly? The dish involves a small squid, usually cleaned and cut into bite-sized pieces, which are then served while still moving. That's right, the pieces squirm on your plate, thanks to residual nerve activity. When you pick up a piece with chopsticks or your fingers, it continues to wiggle and squirm, which is part of the thrill and, for some, part of the danger. The squid is extremely fresh, often caught the same day, and that's why the nerves are still firing. Why do people eat it like this? Well, in Korea, freshness is king. The movement of the squid pieces signals maximum freshness, and the texture is prized, chewy, firm, and satisfying. Sanakji isn't just about taste. It's about the sensory experience. Watching the pieces move, feeling them wiggle in your mouth, and tasting that subtle, clean seafood flavor is a culinary adventure. Some describe it as slightly sweet, lightly briny, and incredibly fresh, a combination that makes it hard to find a substitute anywhere else in the world. Now, here's the big controversy: choking risk. Because the squid pieces are still moving, their tentacles can stick to your throat, especially if you try to swallow them too quickly. There have been documented cases of serious choking, even fatalities, particularly among people unfamiliar with how to eat it safely. The usual advice is to chew thoroughly, cut pieces small, and be cautious. It's a dish that requires skill, respect, and attention, which is why it's not recommended for everyone. Here's a fun fact. The wriggling doesn't mean the squid is alive in the way you might think. It's mostly nerve activity. Even after death, the neurons in the tentacles continue firing for a while, which keeps the pieces moving. So technically, you're not torturing a live squid on your plate, but the visual effect is dramatic and a little unsettling for those seeing it for the first time. Let's imagine the experience. You're at a bustling Korean seafood restaurant. The waiter brings a plate, and you see the tiny squid pieces writhing and squirming slightly, glistening under the light. You pick up a piece with your chopsticks and notice the tentacles curling slightly. You bring it to your mouth, and the first bite is chewy, slightly sweet, and unmistakably fresh. You chew carefully, savoring the flavor and texture, while also aware that you can't just gulp it down. Every bite is a combination of thrill and taste, and that's exactly what makes sanachi memorable. The dish also sparks a lot of debate. Is it ethical? Some people see it as cultural tradition, part of Korea's culinary heritage. Others see it as intimidating or cruel, even if the squid is technically dead. And then there's the health angle. Beyond choking, raw squid can harbor bacteria if not handled correctly, adding another layer of caution. This combination of tradition, risk, and thrill makes sanachi one of the most talked about seafood dishes in the world. Here's another interesting angle. People who grow up eating sanachi often learn from a young age how to handle it safely, cutting the squid into manageable pieces, chewing thoroughly, and respecting the movement. For tourists or first-timers, the excitement comes with a steep learning curve. It's a dish that teaches mindfulness, patience, and respect for your food. In the end, sanachi live squid is a wild, unforgettable experience. It's not just about eating. It's about the thrill of the movement, the freshness, and the delicate flavor. But it's also a food that demands respect. Chew carefully, know the risks, and appreciate the tradition behind it. It's controversial because of safety, ethical considerations, and the sheer novelty. But for those who try it responsibly, it's a once-in-a-lifetime culinary adventure. So, would you dare to try it? Could you savor the delicate and fresh taste while navigating the wriggling tentacles? Sanachi teaches an important lesson about respecting food, tradition, and your own limits. And that's exactly why it's so fascinating. A plate of moving squid is not just dinner. It's a story, a thrill, and a taste of Korean culinary culture, all in one bite.
Fesik. All right, get ready for one of the wildest, smelliest, and most adventurous foods you might ever hear about. Fesik, the traditional Egyptian fermented fish. Now, before you wrinkle your nose, let me warn you, fesik is not for the faint of heart. It's beloved in Egypt as a festive dish, especially during Sham el-Nessim, the spring celebration. But it also comes with a serious health risk, botulism. That's right, this stuff is controversial for a very good reason. So, what is fesik exactly? Fesik is made from fermented, salted, and dried gray mullet or a similar fish. The fish is heavily salted, sometimes spiced, and then left to ferment for several weeks or even months. During fermentation, the fish develops a pungent ammonia-like smell and a complex, strong flavor that takes some serious getting used to. Egyptians adore it, claiming that nothing tastes quite like it, but outsiders often find the aroma challenging, to put it mildly. Think of it as a high-stakes adventure for your taste buds and nose. Now here's the controversial part. Botulism. Because fesik is fermented and sometimes improperly handled, there's a real risk of Clostridium botulinum bacteria growth, which produces a toxin that can be deadly if consumed. That's why, in many countries, fesik is restricted or heavily regulated. Even in Egypt, authorities occasionally warn people to buy
only properly prepared, certified physik, especially around festival time, because some homemade versions can be hazardous. So, eating physik isn't just about daring flavors, it's also about trusting your source and understanding the risk. Let's talk taste. If you can get past the smell, physik has a unique, intense flavor. It's salty, fermented, slightly fishy, and full of depth, almost like a combination of pickled fish and aged cheese. Egyptians often eat it with bread, onions, and sometimes lemon juice, which balances the richness and sharpness of the fermented fish. Eating physik is not a settled experience. It's bold, daring, and memorable. One bite is enough to make a lasting impression, and for many, that's part of the thrill. Here's a fun fact. Physik dates back thousands of years to ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians had similar fermentation techniques for preserving fish without refrigeration. It was a practical solution turned culinary tradition, and over centuries it became a festive delicacy. Today, it's celebrated, enjoyed, and sometimes even bragged about, like "I survived physik" is practically a badge of honor for daring eaters. Now, let's imagine the experience. You're in a bustling Egyptian marketplace during Shah Milnessim. Vendors display salted, fermented fish in baskets, the aroma hitting you even before you get close. You pick up a small piece, careful to avoid the salt crystals and tough skin. The moment it touches your tongue, your senses are overwhelmed by the pungent, complex flavor. It's briny, tangy, and intensely fishy, and you chew carefully, savoring the centuries-old tradition, while also being aware of the potential danger. Every bite is part thrill, part history lesson, and part culinary courage test. Physik also sparks cultural discussion. Some people argue it's too risky to eat, pointing to botulism cases and the intense smell. Others defend it as a cultural treasure, saying that when prepared properly, it's perfectly safe and absolutely delicious. This balance between heritage, flavor, and safety is exactly why physik is so fascinating and controversial. It's not just food, it's a statement about tradition, daring, and the human taste for bold flavors. Another angle, preparation matters. Certified physik producers carefully clean, salt, and ferment the fish under controlled conditions to minimize the risk of botulism. They follow techniques passed down through generations, blending art, science, and tradition. So, while homemade or poorly handled physik can be dangerous, professionally prepared physik is a flavorful, albeit intense, delicacy. In the end, physik teaches an important lesson about risk, culture, and sensory adventure. It's controversial because of potential botulism, but it's cherished because of its flavor, history, and the courage it takes to eat it. This isn't just a meal, it's a journey through ancient culinary techniques, festive traditions, and daring flavor experiences. Eating physik is an act of respect for tradition, curiosity, and bravery. So, would you try it? Could you handle the smell, the intense flavor, and the knowledge that it carries a small risk? Physik is more than just a food. It's a story, a tradition, and a test of your culinary courage. One bite, and you're not just tasting fermented fish. You're tasting centuries of history, culture, and daring tradition, all in one unforgettable experience.
Red caviar from sturgeon. All right, let's talk about red caviar, also known as salmon roe, but today we're focusing on the kind that comes from sturgeon. If you've ever seen it on a fancy appetizer plate or in a high-end restaurant, you know it's glossy, vibrant, and looks almost too pretty to eat. But behind that luxurious appearance lies a story of controversy, heavy regulation, and environmental concern. So what is red caviar exactly? Caviar is the eggs of sturgeon fish, carefully harvested, salted, and packaged for consumption. Red caviar specifically refers to the orange-red variety, often from salmon or certain sturgeon species. The eggs are tiny, glossy spheres that pop in your mouth, releasing a salty, briny flavor that's highly prized in gourmet cuisine. Unlike black caviar, red caviar is slightly milder, but just as luxurious, and it's often used in appetizers, sushi, blinis, or simply enjoyed on its own. Now here's why red caviar is controversial. Overfishing and endangered species. Sturgeon populations have been declining for decades due to overharvesting for their roe, habitat loss, and pollution. Because of this, many countries heavily regulate the trade of sturgeon caviar to prevent extinction. International agreements like CITES, Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species, strictly monitor sturgeon products, limiting exports and imports. Some species of sturgeon are so endangered that harvesting their roe is completely illegal in certain regions. So when you see red caviar on a menu, it's not just a luxury, it's a product of environmental and legal considerations. Let's talk about taste. Red caviar is salty, slightly sweet, and bursts with a fresh ocean flavor. The eggs have a delicate texture. They're firm enough to pop, but soft enough to melt in your mouth. Eating it is as much about texture as it is about flavor. Many connoisseurs describe the experience as elegant, luxurious, and incredibly satisfying, especially when paired with buttery blinis, cream cheese, or a splash of lemon. The flavor is subtle, yet unmistakably premium, and even a small spoonful feels indulgent. Here's a fun fact. Despite being a luxury item, red caviar isn't always from wild sturgeon. Many countries now use farmed sturgeon to meet demand while protecting wild populations. Aquaculture has allowed chefs and consumers to enjoy caviar without completely devastating the ecosystem. But the wild stuff is still considered more prestigious, which keeps demand and prices high. It's a delicate balance between luxury, taste, and conservation. Now let's imagine the experience. You're at a gourmet brunch, a small spoonful of bright orange-red red caviar on a blini with a dollop of creme fraiche. You take a bite. The eggs burst in your mouth, releasing a salty, slightly sweet flavor that dances on your tongue. There's a satisfying pop and a subtle oceanic aroma, and you savor every second. But in the back of your mind, you're aware that these eggs come from sturgeon, a species that's carefully monitored and protected, adding another layer of appreciation and mindfulness to the experience. Red caviar also sparks debates about ethics and sustainability. Should people eat it if it comes from wild sturgeon? How do you balance gourmet indulgence with conservation? This has led to a booming interest in sustainable farmed caviar, as well as increased consumer awareness about sourcing. Knowing where your red caviar comes from isn't just about taste, it's about responsibility. Chefs and consumers who care about sustainability often seek caviar that's certified, traceable, and responsibly farmed, making the luxury feel both indulgent and ethical. Another interesting angle, red caviar isn't just for elite dining. In some cultures, it's a festival food used in celebrations, weddings, and holidays. The bright color symbolizes wealth, prosperity, and luxury, which adds cultural significance to the culinary experience. Eating red caviar is therefore not just about flavor, but also about tradition, status, and the joy of celebrating special occasions. In the end, red caviar from sturgeon is a delicate, luxurious, and highly regulated food. Its controversy comes from environmental, ethical, and legal factors, but its allure comes from taste, texture, and tradition. Eating it is a combination of culinary pleasure, mindfulness, and respect. You're savoring a rare treat while appreciating the care that goes into bringing it to your plate. So, would you try red caviar from sturgeon? Could you enjoy the salty, luxurious burst of flavor while being aware of the conservation issues behind it? It's a food that's both indulgent and responsible, offering a taste of the ocean, a slice of luxury, and a connection to global environmental awareness, all in one tiny, vibrant egg.
Kopi Luwak coffee. All right, let's talk about one of the most bizarre and controversial coffees in the world, Kopi Luwak, also known as civet coffee. If you've heard the hype, you might know it as the world's most expensive coffee, sometimes selling for hundreds of dollars per cup. Sounds fancy, right? But here's the kicker. Its production is highly controversial because of animal cruelty. So, before you dream of sipping a cup of this exotic brew, let's delve into the story behind it. First things first, what exactly is Kopi Luwak? It's coffee made from coffee beans that have passed through the digestive system of a civet, a small mammal found in Southeast Asia. The civet eats ripe coffee cherries, digests the fruit pulp, and excretes the beans, which are then collected, cleaned, fermented, roasted, and brewed. The idea is that the enzymes in the civet's digestive tract alter the proteins in the beans, producing a coffee with a supposedly smoother, less bitter flavor. Sounds wild, right? And it is, both fascinating and a little gross, depending on how you look at it. Here's why it's controversial. In the wild, civets naturally eat coffee cherries, and the process could technically be considered a natural, sustainable method. But in reality, most Kopi Luwak on the market comes from caged civets, often kept in tiny, stressful cages and fed nothing but coffee cherries to produce more beans. This practice is widely criticized for being cruel and unethical, and many animal welfare organizations advise against buying it. So, while the coffee may be a luxury item, the production behind it raises serious ethical questions. Now, let's talk about taste. Kopi Luwak is often described as smooth, less acidic, and mild, with the unique flavor that's hard to replicate with regular coffee beans. It's less bitter because the civet's digestive enzymes break down certain proteins, and the roasting process adds the familiar coffee aroma. For some coffee aficionados, it's a rare, exotic treat, a cup of coffee unlike anything else in the world. But for many people, the taste doesn't justify the ethical issues and exorbitant price. Here's a fun fact. The concept of civet coffee actually originated in Indonesia, where Dutch colonialists noticed that wild civets were eating coffee cherries but avoiding the less ripe ones. The beans collected from their droppings produced a smoother coffee, and locals began harvesting them. It wasn't originally a luxury product, it was just a byproduct of natural wildlife behavior. Only later did it become a high-end gourmet curiosity, marketed around the globe for its rarity and novelty. Let's imagine the experience. You're sitting in a sleek cafe somewhere in Bali, handed a small cup of Kopi Luwak. You bring it to your nose. There's a rich, aromatic coffee scent, earthy and deep. You take a sip, and the flavor is smoother, richer, and less bitter than most coffees, with a subtle sweetness that makes you appreciate why people pay such high prices. But as you savor it, you can't ignore the fact that this coffee originated from an animal under stressful conditions, which makes the experience complicated. It's a mixture of luxury, curiosity, and ethical reflection. The controversy also sparks wider debate about sustainability, ethical sourcing, and the foodie culture. Some companies now claim to produce wild-sourced or ethical Kopi Luwak, where civets roam free and eat natural diets, producing beans in humane conditions. But verifying these claims is tough, and there's still a lot of mislabeling in the market. So, as a consumer,
Enjoying Kopi Luwak responsibly means asking questions, researching sources, and thinking about animal welfare, not just taste and prestige. Another interesting angle, Kopi Luwak teaches us a lot about human fascination with rarity, novelty, and luxury. People are willing to pay extreme prices for the thrill of drinking something exotic, even if it comes at an ethical cost. It's a reminder that food and drink aren't just about flavor, they're about storytelling, cultural curiosity, and status. And in this case, the story behind the coffee is as wild and complicated as its production method. In the end, Kopi Luwak is a coffee that's unforgettable for its flavor, history, and controversy. It's exotic, smooth, and rare, but it also comes with a cautionary tale about ethics, animal welfare, and consumer responsibility. So would you try Kopi Luwak? Could you enjoy the luxury, smooth coffee while thinking about the civets behind it? It's a drink that blends adventure, flavor, and moral reflection, offering a story in every sip, a story that's as bold as the coffee itself.